I never wanted to spend the weekend in that cabin. It was my brother's idea. He had this thing about getting away from the city, clearing our minds, reconnecting with nature. He always talked about how we were too plugged in, how we needed to escape for a bit. I wasn't against the idea, but something about this trip didn't sit right with me. I couldn't put my finger on it. It was just a feeling, but I ignored it. The drive up took nearly 5 hours. The roads were long and winding, with fewer signs of civilization the farther we went. Eventually, the highway turned into a narrow gravel road, and trees pressed in from both sides. The GPS lost signal, but my brother assured me we were almost there. I watched the trees blur past, feeling more isolated with every passing mile. The cabin sat at the end of the road, tucked between towering pines. It looked old but sturdy, the kind of place that had weathered countless winters. The wood was dark and worn, the windows smudged with age. There was no one around for miles. No neighbors, no passing cars, nothing but the endless stretch of trees. We unloaded the truck in silence. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of damp earth and pine needles. Inside, the cabin was basic: one main room with a fireplace, a small kitchen, and a single bedroom with an old wooden bed. It smelled like dust and would smoke, like no one had stayed here in a long time. My brother tossed his bag on the floor and stretched. The first night was uneventful. We ate canned food, lit a fire, and sat in silence as the flames flickered. The woods outside were quiet, too quiet. I listened for the usual sounds of the forest, rustling leaves, distant owl calls, but there was nothing, just a thick, pressing silence. I woke up in the middle of the night. At first, I didn't know what had disturbed me. The fire had burned down to embers, casting weak shadows across the walls. My brother was asleep on the couch, his breathing slow and steady. I sat up, rubbing my face, and that's when I heard it. A soft, deliberate crunching sound. Footsteps, not the light steps of an animal. Heavier, slow, careful. Someone was walking outside the cabin. I held my breath, straining to hear. The footsteps moved around the cabin, pausing now and then, as if whoever it was listening. My heart pounded in my chest. I wanted to wake my brother, but I couldn't move. I just sat there, frozen. Minutes passed. The footsteps stopped. I told myself it was nothing. Maybe a deer, maybe my mind playing tricks on me. I forced myself to lie back down, but I didn't sleep. The next morning, I stepped outside, my boots crunching in the damp dirt. The air was cold, the sun barely rising over the trees. I walked around the cabin, looking for tracks, and I found them. Footprints, human footprints. They circled the cabin, stopping beneath each window. My stomach twisted. Someone had been watching us, standing just outside, looking in. I went back inside, locking the door behind me. My brother was making coffee, oblivious. I wanted to tell him, but I didn't. I don't know why. Maybe I didn't want to sound paranoid. Maybe I didn't want to admit how scared I was. The second night was worse. The fire crackled as we sat in silence. I kept glancing at the windows, but there was nothing, just darkness. Around midnight, my brother turned in, leaving me alone by the dying fire. Then I heard it again. Footsteps, closer this time. I sat perfectly still, listening. The steps moved to the front door. A faint creak as weight shifted on the wooden porch. My hands curled into fists. I felt trapped like a cornered animal. Then, a soft, deliberate knock. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. I just stared at the door, my heart hammering in my chest. The knock came again, a little harder, then silence. I stayed like that for what felt like hours, my eyes locked on the door. Eventually, exhaustion took over, and I must have dozed off. When I woke up, it was morning, and my brother was already up, stretching and yawning like nothing had happened. I checked outside. The footprints were there, clearer this time. They led from the tree line to the porch and then back into the woods. I wanted to leave. I told my brother something felt off, that we should go. He laughed it off, said I was letting the isolation get to me. That night, I barely slept. Every noise made my skin crawl. Around 2 a.m., I heard the door handle rattle. Someone was trying to get in. I shot up, grabbing the hunting knife we had brought. My brother groaned, half asleep. Then something slammed against the door. Not a polite knock this time, a full body weight crashing against the wood. The door shuddered. My brother jolted awake. Another slam, harder, then silence. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. When dawn broke, we packed our things. My brother didn't argue this time. He had heard it too. As we loaded the truck, I noticed something. A piece of torn fabric caught on a nail by the porch. Dark, dirty, like an old jacket. Someone had been out there, watching us, waiting. We didn't say a word the whole drive home. We never went back. I never should have gone up there alone. Started as a good idea. I wanted to get away from the noise, the endless notifications, the city lights that never let the sky go dark. I had been burned out for months. My boss told me to take some time off, and I figured a cabin in the woods would be the perfect place to clear my head. I found a place online, an old, off-grid cabin miles from the nearest town. The owner, some guy named Rick, said it had everything I needed: wood for the stove, a generator, a well for water. No Wi-Fi, no cell service. Exactly what I wanted. The drive up there took longer than I expected. The paved roads turned to gravel, then dirt, then barely anything at all. Trees pressed in close on both sides. I hadn't seen another car in an hour when I finally spotted the cabin, sitting in a small clearing. It looked just like the pictures. Dark wood, a tin roof, a small porch out front. A single window on the second floor. Inside, it was basic but comfortable. A wood-burning stove, a small kitchen, a couch with an old blanket thrown over it. Stairs led up to a loft with a bed. I dropped my bags and took a deep breath. The silence was thick, pressing. No cars, no voices, just the wind moving through the trees. That first night was fine. I made a fire in the stove, cooked some canned soup, read by lantern light. When I went to bed, it took a while to get used to the quiet, but eventually, I fell asleep. I don't know what woke me, a sound, maybe, or just the weight of being alone in a place that wasn't mine. I sat up and listened. The fire had burned down to embers. The room was cold. Outside, the wind had stopped. The kind of stillness that feels unnatural, like something is waiting. I forced myself to lie back down. It was just my imagination. The first night in a new place always feels strange. I told myself that over and over until I finally drifted off again. The next day, I explored a bit. There was a trail behind the cabin that led up a ridge. I followed it for a while, taking in the view, the absolute emptiness. No sign of people anywhere, just trees and sky. I made it back to the cabin in the late afternoon and found something strange. The front door was open. I was sure I had closed it. The wind, I thought. Maybe I hadn't latched it all the way. But when I stepped inside, a cold feeling crept up my spine. Something was off. My bag wasn't where I left it. The blanket from the couch was on the floor. Felt wrong, like someone had been here. I checked every corner, every shadow. Nothing. The door didn't even have a lock, just a simple latch. If someone wanted to come in, they could. That night, I kept the hatchet from the woodpile next to my bed. I barely slept. Every sound felt like a footstep. The next morning, I found tracks outside. Boot prints, leading from the trees to the cabin. I stared at them for a long time, trying to make sense of it. They weren't mine. I hadn't been over there, and whoever made them hadn't left. They just stopped at the front porch. I packed my things. I wanted to leave, but my car wouldn't start. The battery was dead. No cell service. No way to call for help. I tried to stay calm. There was a gas station about 10 miles back. If I started walking, I could make it before dark. I took my backpack, filled a water bottle, grabbed the hatchet just in case. Locked the cabin behind me even though it didn't matter. I walked fast, heart hammering, every snap of a twig making me jump. The woods felt different now, like they were watching. After about an hour, I stopped to catch my breath. That's when I saw them. More footprints, fresh ones. Someone was following me. I turned in a slow circle, scanning the trees. Nothing, just empty woods. But I wasn't alone. I ran. I ran until my lungs burned, until my legs screamed. The path twisted and turned, and at some point, I must have taken a wrong turn because I wasn't on the trail anymore. I was surrounded by trees. Panic clawed up my throat. I tried to retrace my steps, but every direction looked the same. The sun was getting lower. Then I heard it, a branch snapping. Close, too close. I didn't think. I just ran. Through the trees, over roots, my backpack bouncing against me. The sound of footsteps behind me, faster, gaining. Then up ahead, the cabin. I didn't question it. I just sprinted for the door, nearly tripping up the porch steps, fumbling with the latch. I slammed it shut behind me and backed away, gasping for breath. Silence. Then a soft sound. Not outside, inside. A slow, deliberate creak from the loft above me. Someone was in the cabin. I gripped the hatchet so tight my fingers ached. The stairs creaked, one step at a time. I didn't wait. I bolted for the door, throwing it open, sprinting into the trees. I didn't stop. I didn't look back. I just ran. I don't know how long I ran before I saw headlights. A truck on the road. I stumbled out, waving my arms. The driver slammed the brakes, rolled down the window. "What the hell happened to you?" he asked. I couldn't answer. I just climbed in, shaking, barely able to breathe. He drove me to town, to the gas station. I called the cops, told them everything. When they went up to check the cabin, they found my stuff. My bag, my food, my hatchet. But they didn't find anyone else. No footprints, no sign of forced entry. Just the door swinging open in the wind. I don't know what happened out there. I don't want to know. I just know I'll never go back. I needed the solitude. Life had gotten too loud, too fast, and I was running on empty. So, when a friend mentioned his uncle had an old hunting cabin up in the mountains, I took the opportunity without a second thought. No service, no electricity, just a wood stove, a gas lamp, and complete isolation. It sounded perfect. The drive took longer than I expected. The roads were winding, narrow, and covered in patches of ice. By the time I arrived, the sun was already dipping behind the trees. The cabin was exactly as my friend described. Small, weathered, but sturdy. It sat in a clearing, surrounded by thick forest. The nearest town was over an hour away. I parked my truck, grabbed my bags, and stepped inside. Inside, it smelled of old wood and dust. A single room with a cot in one corner, a wood-burning stove, a small table, and a few chairs. The kitchen area was just a counter with an old gas burner. A door at the back led to an outhouse. I unpacked, stacked some wood by the stove, and got a fire going before the cold seeped in too deep. That first night was uneventful. I read by lantern light, listened to the wind howl through the trees, and eventually drifted off. It was the next morning that things started feeling off. I woke up early, planning to gather more firewood before the cold got worse. As I stepped outside, the first thing I noticed was my truck. The driver's side door was slightly open. I knew I had locked it. I always locked my truck. I checked inside. Nothing seemed missing, but the seat was reclined back further than I remembered. I shut the door, double-checked the lock, and told myself I must have just forgotten. The rest of the day passed quietly. I chopped wood, cooked, and tried to relax. But there was this nagging feeling in the back of my mind, like something was watching me. Every now and then, I thought I saw movement in the trees, just a flicker, like someone ducking out of sight. But every time I looked directly, there was nothing. That night, I locked the cabin door and propped a chair against it, just in case. The fire crackled in the stove, and I sat at the table trying to read. Then, just past midnight, I heard it. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate, crunching over the frozen ground outside. They circled the cabin once, then stopped. I held my breath, straining to hear. Nothing, just the wind. I waited, my heart hammering. After a long time, I finally convinced myself it had been an animal. A deer, maybe. I forced myself to lie down, though I barely slept. Morning came, and with it, fresh snow. I stepped outside, and my stomach dropped. There, just outside the cabin, were footprints. Human, not mine. They led from the forest, circled the cabin, then stopped directly beneath the window where I had been sitting the night before. I felt sick. Someone had been standing there, watching me. I scanned the tree line, but whoever had been there was long gone. I thought about leaving. My gut told me to get in the truck and go. But I told myself it was probably some hunter passing through. Maybe some drifter who saw the light from my fire and got curious. Unnerving, sure, but not a reason to panic. I decided to stay, but I kept my rifle close. The third night, I barricaded the door with the table, made sure the fire was strong, and stayed awake as long as I could. But sleep eventually took over. I woke up to the sound of something scratching. Not at the door, at the window. I didn't move. The scratching was slow, deliberate, like fingernails against the glass. I reached for my rifle, keeping as still as possible. The sound stopped. The cabin was silent. Then 3 soft knocks on the window. I spun, aiming my rifle, but the curtains were drawn. I couldn't see who or what was out there. My chest was tight. My mind screamed at me to do something, but I couldn't move. I just sat there, listening to my own breathing. Minutes passed, then an hour. Nothing else happened. When the first light of dawn seeped through the cracks in the curtains, I finally worked up the nerve to move. Rifle in hand, I approached the window and yanked the curtain back. There was nothing there, just empty snow. But when I opened the door and stepped outside, I saw them again. Footprints, leading from the trees, stopping just beneath the window. They were deeper than before. Whoever it was had been standing there for a long time. I'd had enough. I packed my things in record time and threw them into my truck. I didn't even eat. I just wanted to get out of there. As I started the engine, I looked one last time toward the trees. That was when I saw it. A figure, dressed in dark clothing, half hidden among the trees. Standing still, watching. I slammed the truck into gear and tore down that road as fast as I could. My hands were shaking. My heart felt like it was going to explode. I didn't stop until I hit town. I pulled into a gas station, ran inside, and told the clerk what happened. He just looked at me, then at the old guy sitting by the coffee machine. The old man asked where I'd been staying. I told him. He sighed, shaking his head. "You're lucky." I asked what he meant, and he just muttered, "Not everyone who stays up there makes it back." I left and never looked back. I don't know who or what was out there in the woods that night, and I don't want to know. I was never the type to get spooked easily. I didn't believe in ghosts, demons, or any of that supernatural nonsense. But fear, real fear, doesn't need something out of a fairy tale to make your stomach drop and your heart pound in your chest. Real fear comes from knowing that something is out there, something you can't explain, something that isn't supposed to be there. Last winter, I rented a cabin deep in the Montana wilderness. I wanted to get away from everything, work, people, the noise of the city. It was a simple cabin, nothing fancy. Just a one-story wooden structure with a small fireplace, a kitchen, a bedroom, and a bathroom. No Wi-Fi, no cell service. That was the whole point. I wanted to be alone. The first few days were peaceful. I spent most of my time chopping firewood, hiking through the snow-covered trails, and cooking simple meals over the gas stove. At night, I would sit by the fire with a book and listen to the silence. It was a different kind of quiet, the kind that made you realize how much noise you live with every day. First, it was relaxing, but after a while, the silence started to feel heavy, like it was pressing down on me. The first strange thing happened on my third night. I woke up in the middle of the night to the sound of crunching snow outside my window. I lay there listening. At first, I told myself it was an animal. Maybe a deer, maybe a coyote. But the footsteps were slow, deliberate. Not the quick, light movements of an animal. And they stopped right outside my bedroom window. I didn't move. I just listened. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. I don't know how long I lay there, but eventually, the footsteps started again, this time moving away from the cabin. I wanted to believe it was my imagination, but I knew better. The next morning, I went outside to check. There were tracks in the snow, leading from the tree to my window and then back into the woods. Human tracks. Not boots, not shoes. Bare feet. I stood there for a long time, staring at them, trying to make sense of it. Who the hell would be walking around in the snow barefoot in the middle of the night? I told myself it was just some hiker who got lost. Maybe they were disoriented, maybe they wandered too far. But I couldn't shake the feeling that whoever it was had stopped outside my window on purpose. I should have left then, but I didn't. I told myself I was being paranoid. That night, I locked the doors and windows before going to bed. I told myself it was just a precaution. I told myself it was nothing. But sometime in the night, I woke up again. This time, I didn't hear footsteps. I heard breathing. It was faint, barely audible over the crackling fire in the other room, but it was there. Someone was standing outside my window, breathing. I lay completely still, listening, waiting, and then, just like before, the sound faded. When I finally got the courage to get up and look outside, there was nothing there but fresh footprints leading back into the trees. I stayed inside all the next day. I kept the fire going, kept the doors locked. I thought about hiking back to my truck and leaving, but the storm had gotten worse overnight. The roads were buried under heavy snow, and I wasn't sure my truck would even make it out. I told myself I'd wait one more night, just one more. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat in the living room with my back against the wall, my hunting rifle in my lap. I kept the lights off. I wanted to be able to see outside. The fire had burned down to embers, and the only light was the faint glow of the moon through the window. And then, sometime in the early hours of the morning, I saw it. A figure standing at the edge of the tree, just standing there, watching. I didn't move. I just stared. It was too dark to make out details, but I could see enough. The figure was tall, thin. It wasn't wearing a coat. It wasn't wearing anything. Just a pale shape standing in the snow, facing my cabin. I raised my rifle, aiming it at the figure. My hands were shaking. I didn't want to fire unless I had to. I didn't want to find out what would happen if I missed. But as soon as I lifted the gun, the figure turned and walked back into the woods. Not running, not stumbling, just walking, slow, calm, like it knew I wouldn't shoot. I stayed up until the sun came up. As soon as there was enough light, I grabbed my gear, threw everything into my truck, and left. I didn't care about the storm. I didn't care about the snow-covered roads. I just drove, foot pressed hard against the gas pedal until I made it back to town. I never reported it. What would I even say? Someone was standing outside my cabin? That's not a crime. And even if it was, who would believe me? But I know what I saw. I know what I heard. Sometimes late at night, when everything is quiet, I think about that figure in the snow. I think about the bare footprints leading to my window. I think about the slow, steady breathing outside my room. And I wonder if it's still out there, watching, waiting for someone else to come looking for solitude. I had been looking forward to this trip for months. A full week alone in a remote cabin, deep in the woods, far from the city and all its noise. It was supposed to be a reset, a way to clear my head, breathe fresh air, and just exist without the constant distractions of everyday life. No emails, no phone calls, no people. Just me, the trees, and silence. I rented the cabin online from some guy named Carl. It was listed as the perfect getaway. Small, old-fashioned, completely off-grid. The pictures showed a quaint wooden structure, a wraparound porch, and a small lake just a few hundred feet away. It seemed like exactly what I needed. I packed light, just some food, a few books, and a flashlight in case the solar-powered lights didn't hold up through the night. Carl gave me instructions to find the place since there were no roads leading directly to it. I had to park at a small clearing about 3 miles away and hike in. The drive out was long, the roads turning from asphalt to gravel, then finally to dirt. I arrived at the clearing just as the sun was setting, slung my backpack over my shoulders, and started the hike. The air was crisp and cool, the scent of pine thick in the air. It was peaceful. The cabin looked just like the pictures, maybe even better. It had a rustic charm, and I felt a wave of relief knowing that I had a solid roof over my head. I stepped onto the porch and pushed open the creaky wooden door. Inside, everything was simple. A bed in the corner, a small kitchen, a fireplace, and a rocking chair by the window. A single lantern sat on the wooden table, next to an old knife. I didn't think much of it. I lit the lantern, set my bag down, and started to settle in. The first night was uneventful. I made a small fire, heated up some canned soup, and sat outside for a while, listening to the sounds of the forest. Crickets, the occasional rustle of leaves, maybe a distant owl. Normal, peaceful sounds. But the second night was when things started to feel off. I woke up to a sound outside, a single, distinct crunch of leaves. My eyes opened instantly, my breath held. I listened, waiting for another sound, but there was nothing, just silence. Maybe an animal, a deer or a raccoon. I told myself that and eventually drifted back to sleep. The next morning, I stepped outside to find fresh footprints in the dirt. Not shoe prints, bare feet. Human. They started a few feet from the porch, circled around the cabin, then disappeared into the woods. I felt a cold knot in my stomach. Someone had been here, watching. I stared at the footprints for a long time before finally shaking it off. Maybe someone got lost, passed through. It was unsettling, but I wasn't about to turn back now. I went about my day as planned. Took a hike, sat by the lake, read my book. By the time the sun set, I convinced myself that it had to have been nothing. But that night, I woke up again. This time, it wasn't just a single sound. There was movement outside. Slow, deliberate footsteps circling the cabin. The wood creaked as someone stepped onto the porch. My heart pounded. I stayed completely still, barely breathing. Then the door handle rattled. Just once. A slow, testing turn. I sat up, gripping the flashlight, my pulse hammering in my ears. The handle stopped moving, but the presence outside remained. I could feel it, standing just beyond the door, listening. I don't know how long I sat there, frozen. Felt like hours. But eventually, the sounds faded. The footsteps retreated, moving back into the woods. When the first light of dawn came through the window, I forced myself to step outside. The footprints were back, circling the cabin just like before. This time, they led directly to the door, then away into the trees. I should have left right then, but I didn't. I told myself I was being paranoid, that I was overreacting. Maybe it was some backwoods hermit, some drifter who didn't know anyone was staying here. I decided to stay one more night. That was a mistake. The final night, I didn't sleep at all. I kept the fire going, the knife within reach. The wind howled through the trees, making it impossible to tell if there was movement outside. Hours passed. I sat there, every muscle tense, listening, waiting. Then, around 3 in the morning, I heard it again. This time, there were 2 sets of footsteps. They didn't circle the cabin. They walked straight to the door. The handle turned harder this time, more forceful. I jumped up, flashlight in one hand, knife in the other. The door didn't budge. It was locked, but the weight of something pressed against it. They were testing it, seeing if they could force it open. I held my breath, gripping the knife tighter. Then, just as suddenly as it started, the pressure stopped. The footsteps retreated, but this time they didn't fade into the trees. They stayed close. I could feel them just beyond the thin wooden walls. Waiting. I didn't move until the sun came up. As soon as it was light enough to see, I packed my bag, grabbed the knife, and stepped outside. The footprints were fresh. They led from the door to the side of the cabin, to the window where I had been sitting all night. And then they vanished, just stopped like whoever made them had disappeared into thin air. No trail leading away, just gone. I didn't think. I ran. I ran the entire 3 miles back to my car, heart pounding, lungs burning. I didn't stop until I was behind the wheel, doors locked, speeding down that dirt road, away from whatever had been out there with me. I never looked back, never went back. I don't know who they were, what they wanted, or why they left when they did. But I do know one thing. I wasn't alone in that cabin, and I never will be again. I had always wanted to get away from the noise of the city, So when my uncle offered me his old cabin for the weekend, I didn't think twice. I packed light, a few changes of clothes, some canned food, a flashlight, and my hunting knife. The cabin was deep in the woods, about a 2-hour drive from town. The last stretch of the trip was a narrow dirt road barely wide enough for my truck, with trees crowding in on both sides. By the time I reached the cabin, the sun was already starting to dip below the trees. The place was exactly what I expected: small, old, and isolated. A simple one-room cabin with a creaky wooden porch, a chimney, and a single window looking out at the trees. There was a shed about 20 yards away and a rusted-out water pump near the front door. No electricity, no running water. The inside smelled like dust and wood, and the furniture was simple: a cot, a wooden table, a chair, and a small stove. There were old hunting magazines stacked in the corner and a pile of chopped wood near the fireplace. I set my bag down and decided to check the place out. Everything seemed in order, though I noticed deep scratches on the wooden floor near the door. They looked old, maybe from an animal that had gotten inside at some point. The door itself was sturdy, reinforced with metal brackets, and had a thick wooden beam to lock it from the inside. I made a mental note to secure it once it got dark. The first night was quiet. I built a fire in the stove, ate a can of chili, and sat outside on the porch, listening to the sounds of the forest. The silence out here was different than in the city. It wasn't complete silence. There were crickets, the rustling of leaves, the occasional snap of a twig, but there was an emptiness to it, like the world had shrunk down to just me and the trees. I went inside, bolted the door, and stretched out on the cot. The fire crackled softly, casting shadows on the walls. I must have dozed off, but at some point in the night, I woke up feeling uneasy. There was a sound outside, a slow, dragging sound, like something being pulled through the dirt. My heart started pounding. I sat up and listened. The sound stopped. I stayed awake for a long time, staring at the door, my knife in my hand. Eventually, exhaustion took over, and I drifted off again. The next morning, I stepped outside and saw something that made my stomach twist. The dirt in front of the cabin was disturbed. Long, uneven grooves leading from the tree line to the porch, like something had been dragged. I followed the marks with my eyes, but they vanished into the underbrush. There were no footprints, no signs of an animal, just those strange, deep marks. I told myself it could have been anything. Maybe a fallen branch dragged by the wind, maybe some animal I wasn't familiar with, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. I spent the day hiking, trying to clear my mind. The forest was dense, and after a while, everything started to look the same. I marked trees with my knife to make sure I didn't get lost. About an hour into my hike, I found something strange: a rusted old trap, half buried in the dirt. It was a bear trap, the kind with jagged teeth meant to snap shut on a limb. But what bothered me was that it had been triggered, and there was dried blood on the metal. Old blood, dark and flaky. I kicked some dirt over it and moved on. The feeling of being watched started not long after. It was subtle at first, just an itch in the back of my mind, but it grew stronger the further I went. I kept glancing over my shoulder, expecting to see someone, but there was nothing. Just trees. When I finally turned back toward the cabin, I walked faster than I needed to. That night, I locked the door tight, shoved the cot against it, and kept my knife within reach. I didn't know what was out there, but I wasn't about to take chances. The night was long, and I barely slept. Every sound felt too close, too deliberate. Branches snapped. Leaves rustled in a way that didn't sound like the wind. Then, just before dawn, I heard it again. The dragging sound, closer this time, right outside the door. I held my breath, gripping the knife so tight my knuckles ached. The sound stopped. Then, a slow, deliberate knock. Just one. Then another. Not a pounding, not frantic. Just a slow, steady knock. I didn't move, didn't breathe. The knocking stopped, and after what felt like an eternity, the dragging sound returned, moving away from the cabin, fading into the trees. The first light, I stepped outside. The dirt was disturbed again, but this time there were footprints mixed in with the grooves. bare footprints. Human. I didn't waste time. I threw my things into my truck and got the hell out of there. I didn't care about leaving the cabin a mess. I didn't care about looking back. I just drove. Back in town, I told my uncle what had happened. His face went pale. He was quiet for a long time before he finally said, "That's why I don't go up there anymore." He never explained further, and I never asked. But I knew, deep down, that whatever had been out there watching me, knocking on that door, it had been watching him too. I don't know why I rented that cabin. Maybe I just wanted to get away. Too many things had piled up in my life, and I needed a break from it all. Work, the city, the noise, the stress. So I searched online, found a listing for a secluded cabin deep in the woods, and booked it for a week. I should have read the details more carefully. The drive there took longer than expected. I lost cell service miles before I reached the dirt road leading to the property. The listing had mentioned that, but it still felt unsettling to see the signal bars disappear. The last half hour of the drive was rough. Potholes, uneven terrain, and narrow turns where one wrong move could send me sliding down into a ditch. When I finally arrived, the place looked exactly like the photos. A small, simple wooden cabin, a porch with a rocking chair, and dense trees in every direction. The nearest town was over an hour away. I grabbed my bag and stepped inside. The air smelled like wood and dust. There was a fireplace in the corner, a small kitchen with a gas stove, a tiny bathroom, and a bedroom with a queen-sized bed covered in an old quilt. Everything was quiet, too quiet. That first night, I slept fine. It wasn't until the second day that things started to feel off. It began with small things. In the morning, I found the front door slightly open. I was sure I had locked it the night before. I brushed it off, thinking maybe I hadn't latched it properly. Later, while making coffee, I noticed the salt shaker had moved to the other side of the counter. Again, I told myself I must have done it without thinking. But that uneasy feeling in my gut wouldn't go away. The next day, I went on a hike. I didn't plan a route, just walked into the trees, enjoying the solitude. The woods stretched endlessly in all directions, thick with undergrowth. I made sure to remember landmarks so I wouldn't get lost. A twisted tree here, a fallen log there. But as I was making my way back, I saw something that made my skin crawl. A boot print, fresh, deep in the dirt. It wasn't mine. I stood there for a long time, staring at it. It wasn't just the fact that someone else had been out here, it was the direction the print was facing. It was pointed toward the path I had just come from, as if someone had been following me. I walked back to the cabin faster than I meant to. My eyes kept darting between the trees, searching for movement. But the woods were still, too still. No birds, no rustling leaves, just silence. That night, I locked the door, double-checked it, then pushed a chair against it just in case. I told myself I was overreacting. But then, sometime after midnight, I woke up to a sound outside. Footsteps, slow, careful, moving around the cabin. I held my breath, listening. The footsteps stopped near the front door. Then I heard it, the doorknob rattling. I stayed frozen in bed, my heart pounding so hard I thought whoever was outside might hear it. The rattling stopped. A long stretch of silence followed. Then, footsteps again, moving away this time, fading into the woods. I didn't sleep after that. The next morning, I packed my things. I didn't care that I had paid for a full week. I just wanted to leave. But when I got to my car, my stomach dropped. The back tire was slashed. Not just flat cut, a long, deep gash along the rubber. I checked the others. The front left tire was the same. Someone had done this on purpose. Panic settled in. I had no service, no way to call for help. I could walk, but it would take hours to reach the nearest road, and I had no idea if whoever did this was still watching me. I went back inside, locked the door, and searched the cabin for anything I could use as a weapon. Kitchen knife, a heavy fire poker. I kept them both within reach. Then I waited and listened. The day passed in unbearable silence. As the sun started to set, I heard it again. Footsteps, closer this time. I gripped the fire poker and moved toward the window as quietly as I could. The porch creaked. Someone was right outside. Then, a shadow moved past the window. I ducked down, my breath caught in my throat. The person, whoever they were, was circling the cabin just like the night before. Slow, patient. I knew I couldn't stay here another night. When the footsteps faded again, I grabbed my backpack, stuffed it with essentials. Water, food, a flashlight, the knife, and waited until it was completely dark. Then I ran. I didn't take the dirt road. If they had slashed my tires, they might be watching it. Instead, I ran straight into the trees, using my flashlight sparingly. Every twig snap made my pulse spike. Every shadow looked like a figure standing between the trees. I kept moving, forcing myself forward, even when my legs screamed in protest. After what felt like hours, I saw lights in the distance. A house. I stumbled toward it, lungs burning. I pounded on the door, barely able to speak when a man opened it. An older guy, probably in his 60s, looking at me with shock. I must have looked like a mess. Sweaty, shaking, dirt on my clothes. I told him someone was out there, that my tires had been slashed, that I had been watched. His expression shifted. Not just concern, something else, like he already knew. "You're lucky," he said. "Some folks go missing out here." He let me inside, locked the door behind me. I didn't ask what he meant. I didn't want to know. By morning, he drove me into town. I got a tow truck, retrieved my car, and never looked back. I don't know who was out there watching me. I don't know what would have happened if I had stayed one more night. And I don't want to know. I still think about that weekend. It was supposed to be a break from everything. Just me, alone in the woods for a few days, away from work, people, and the city noise. I found the cabin online. Some old guy rented it out for cheap. Said it was off-grid but had everything I'd need. I didn't care about luxury. I just wanted silence. The drive up took longer than I expected. The roads got rough after a while, just gravel and dirt, winding through thick trees that felt like they were closing in. I hadn't seen another car for at least an hour when I finally spotted the turnoff. A faded wooden sign with the name Hollow Rock, nailed into it, pointed down an even narrower path. The tires crunched over fallen leaves as I made my way deeper into the woods. The cabin wasn't much. One floor, a porch with a couple of broken chairs, and a chimney that looked like it hadn't seen smoke in years. But it was quiet, peaceful. No cell service, no Wi-Fi, just the sound of the wind moving through the trees. Inside, it was simple. A small kitchen, a couch, a wood stove, and a single bedroom with a bed that felt like it might collapse under my weight. The windows were small, and the whole place smelled like damp wood and dust. I didn't care. I unpacked my bag, set my flashlight on the table, and made myself at home. The first night was fine. I made a fire, read a book, and listened to the sounds outside. The wind was stronger than I expected, pushing against the cabin walls. I could hear the trees creaking, branches snapping somewhere far off. But I told myself it was normal. The woods are full of sounds. I woke up around 3 a.m. to silence. No wind, no rustling leaves, just a heavy, unnatural quiet. I listened for a while, waiting to hear something. An animal, a branch cracking, anything. But there was nothing. It was like the whole forest had gone still. I don't know why it made me uneasy, but it did. The next morning, I went outside and found something strange. There were footprints in the dirt. Not mine. I hadn't walked around that side of the cabin yet. They were fresh, leading from the trees to the front porch, then stopping. No return tracks, just a straight path to my cabin. I told myself it had to be a hiker, maybe someone lost. But I hadn't heard a car, and the nearest town was miles away. I tried to shake it off, but the feeling stayed with me all day. That night, I locked the door and made sure the fire was burning strong. I sat on the couch, staring at the windows, half expecting to see someone looking in. But there was nothing, just the dark outside and the firelight flickering against the walls. I went to bed with my flashlight and a knife from the kitchen, just in case. I woke up again around 3 a.m., This time I heard something. It was soft, almost too quiet to notice. A sound just outside the window. Not footsteps, something lighter, like someone running their fingers along the wooden walls of the cabin. I held my breath, gripping the knife so hard my hand ached. The sound moved, slow and deliberate. Then it stopped. I waited. 10 minutes. 20. I didn't move. Eventually, exhaustion won. I don't remember falling asleep, but when I opened my eyes, the sun was shining through the window. I checked outside. The footprints were back. More of them this time. They circled the cabin. I decided I had enough. I packed my bag, threw it in the truck, and got inside. But when I turned the key, nothing happened. The engine didn't even try to turn over. Just silence. I tried again, and again. Nothing. The truck had been fine yesterday. I checked my phone, knowing damn well there was no signal. I was stuck. The nearest main road was 10 miles away, through dense forest. Walking out wasn't an option, not when I didn't know who or what was out there. I spent the day checking the cabin, looking for anything I could use as a weapon. A rusted hatchet in the shed, a hammer, anything. I kept the fire going all day, even though it was warm, just to feel safer. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat by the fire, facing the door, waiting. Every creak of the cabin made my skin crawl. The wind picked up again, howling through the trees. Then I heard it, something heavy pressing against the door. Not knocking, just leaning. I stared, heart pounding, barely breathing. The wood creaked under the pressure. I gripped the hatchet, forcing myself to stand. Then, just like that, it was gone. I waited until sunrise before I dared to move. The footprints were there again, but now they led away from the cabin. Like whoever had been there wanted me to know they had left. I didn't waste time. I grabbed my bag and started walking. 10 miles, no matter what was out there, was better than spending another night in that cabin. I don't know how long I walked before I heard the car. An old guy, maybe in his 60s, stopped and rolled down his window. He gave me a long look, like he already knew something was wrong. "Your truck break down?" he asked. I nodded, too tired to explain. He didn't ask any more questions, just unlocked the door and let me in. As we drove, I glanced back at the woods. The trees stood still, quiet, almost peaceful. Almost. The drive up the mountain took longer than expected. The road was winding and uneven, and the deeper I went into the forest, the less maintained it became. Potholes littered the path, some so deep they made my tires jolt as if the whole truck might snap in half. The trees grew thicker the higher I climbed, their branches stretching over the road like skeletal fingers trying to keep me from reaching my destination. I had rented the cabin for the week, a break from the city, from the constant noise and stress. I wanted silence, just the sound of the wind and the trees and maybe the distant call of some animal in the woods. The listing had been vague, secluded, off-grid, no electricity, only a wood-burning stove and an old well for water. It sounded perfect at the time. When I finally arrived, the sun was already beginning to set. The cabin sat in a small clearing, surrounded by tall pines that swayed lazily in the breeze. It looked old, the wood darkened with age, the roof slightly slanted from years of heavy snowfall. There was no driveway, just a small patch of flattened grass where the previous renters must have parked. I stepped out of the truck and stretched, my back aching from the long drive. The air was crisp, cooler than I expected, and smelled of damp earth and pine needles. I grabbed my bag from the passenger seat, along with the cooler of food and the bundle of firewood I had picked up along the way. Inside, the cabin was simple. A single room with a stone fireplace in the center, a small cot pushed against the far wall, and a wooden table with 2 chairs. A few shelves held old pots and pans, their surfaces blackened with years of use. The floor creaked with every step, the wood warped and uneven. I set my things down and lit a few candles I had brought. Darkness came quickly up here, swallowing the light as soon as the sun dipped behind the trees. I built a small fire in the stove, the dry logs catching easily, filling the space with warmth. As I sat in the flickering light, I became aware of just how quiet it was. No distant hum of traffic, no voices, no music playing from a neighboring apartment. Just the crackling of the fire and the occasional rustling of leaves outside. I should have felt at peace, but something about the silence unsettled me. That night, I slept lightly. The bed was uncomfortable, the mattress thin, but that wasn't what kept me awake. It was the feeling that something wasn't right. I kept hearing sounds outside, subtle at first, barely noticeable. A branch snapping, leaves crunching, maybe an animal, I told myself. But then there was the breathing, not my own. Something deep and steady, just outside the thin wooden walls. I lay still, my own breath shallow, my ears straining in the dark. The fire had burned low, casting long shadows across the cabin. I listened. The breathing was rhythmic, slow, almost like someone was standing just outside, inhaling deeply, exhaling just as slow. I reached for the flashlight beside my bed, clicking it on. The beam swept across the room, revealing nothing but empty space. I turned toward the window, but the glass was covered in a thin layer of grime, making it impossible to see outside. I told myself I was being paranoid. The forest was alive, full of animals. Could be anything. Still, I didn't sleep much after that. The next morning, I stepped outside with a mug of instant coffee, forcing myself to shake off the unease from the night before. The sun was bright, the forest peaceful. Birds called to each other from the branches. A light breeze rustled through the trees. Everything seemed normal. I walked around the cabin, half expecting to find footprints in the dirt, some proof that someone or something had been there. But there was nothing. The day was uneventful. I spent most of it gathering firewood, hiking a bit, trying to enjoy the solitude. By the time the sun began to set, I had convinced myself I had imagined the breathing. Just my mind playing tricks on me. But that night, it came back. I was drifting off when I heard it again. Deep, slow breathing right outside the wall. I sat up, heart pounding. The fire was still burning, casting flickering shadows on the walls. I listened, every muscle in my body tense. Then something moved outside. A soft, deliberate step. Then another. I gripped the flashlight, my fingers white against the handle. My truck was parked only a few yards away, but the thought of stepping outside, of facing whatever was out there, made my stomach twist. I waited. The breathing continued, steady, patient. Then, without warning, something pressed against the door. The wood groaned slightly under the pressure. Not a knock, just pressure, like something was leaning against it. I swallowed hard. My mind raced through possibilities. An animal? A bear? No, a bear would have sniffed around, scratched at the door, made noise. This was deliberate. I stood slowly, careful not to make a sound. The fire crackled softly, filling the silence. Then, just as suddenly as it started, the pressure against the door was gone. The breathing stopped. The night was silent again. I waited, standing there for what felt like hours, but nothing happened. Eventually, exhausted, I sat back down, gripping the flashlight like a weapon. I didn't sleep. By morning, I had made my decision. I was leaving. I packed my things quickly, shoving everything back into my bag. When I stepped outside, the forest was calm, the sky a pale blue, but something caught my eye near the tree-line. Footprints, not animal prints, bare human footprints, leading from the woods to my cabin, stopping just outside the door. I stared at them, my skin crawling. They weren't fresh. The edges were softened by the morning dew, meaning they had been there for hours, meaning that someone had been standing outside my cabin, watching, breathing. I threw my bag into the truck, started the engine, and didn't look back. The whole drive down the mountain, I kept glancing in the rearview mirror, expecting to see someone standing in the road behind me. But there was nothing, just the trees and the long, empty road leading me away from whatever had been outside my cabin that night. I never went back. I don't know how long I sat there, staring at the dark tree line from the porch of the cabin. My body ached, My hands trembled, and my mind felt like it was barely holding on. The weight of exhaustion pressed down on me, but I couldn't sleep. Not after everything that had happened. Started as a solo trip, something I had planned for months. A way to escape the noise of life, clear my head, and get some real alone time. I had rented a cabin deep in the woods, miles away from the nearest town. It was a small place, nothing fancy, just a single-story wooden structure with a fireplace, a tiny kitchen, and a bedroom. The kind of place where you could sit outside at night and hear nothing but the wind moving through the trees. It sounded perfect. The drive up had been peaceful. The roads became narrower the deeper I went into the forest, the trees crowding closer as if swallowing the road. I lost cell service about 30 minutes before I arrived, but that didn't bother me. I wanted isolation. I wanted to be cut off for a while. When I finally pulled up to the cabin, I felt a strange sense of accomplishment. It was quiet, just as I had hoped. I grabbed my bags, went inside, and settled in. For the first few hours, everything was normal. I unpacked, made myself something to eat, and sat outside on the porch as the sun dipped lower in the sky. The air was crisp, colder than I expected for this time of year. I watched the trees sway in the wind, listened to the creaking of the branches, and felt truly at peace. But then, as the last light faded, I noticed something that didn't belong. It was subtle at first. A noise carried through the trees, faint but distinct. It wasn't the wind, nor was it the usual sounds of animals moving through the underbrush. It was rhythmic, deliberate. Footsteps, slow, steady footsteps somewhere in the woods behind the cabin. I tried to tell myself it was my imagination, maybe an animal moving around, but I knew better. I had spent enough time in the outdoors to know what a deer or a raccoon sounded like. This wasn't that. Someone or something was out there. I sat still, listening, straining to pinpoint the source of the sound. It stopped. For a long moment, there was only silence, and I started to convince myself that I had misheard it. Then, just as I was about to go inside, I heard it again, closer this time. I stood up and backed toward the door, suddenly very aware of how alone I was. The cabin was miles from the main road, surrounded by nothing but trees. No neighbors, no help, just me. My heartbeat pounded in my ears as I stepped inside and locked the door. I shut off the lights, crouched low near the window, and peered outside. Darkness. The trees swayed. The wind whispered, but I couldn't see anything moving. I waited. 10 minutes passed, then 20. Nothing. Maybe it had been an animal after all. Maybe I was letting my imagination get the best of me. I forced myself to relax. I grabbed a book, sat by the fireplace, and tried to distract myself. The silence of the cabin should have been comforting, but instead, it felt oppressive, like something was pressing in on me from all sides. I found myself glancing toward the window every few minutes, listening for any sign of movement. But the night remained still. At some point, exhaustion won. My eyes grew heavy, and I decided to head to bed. The bedroom was small, just a simple bed with a wooden nightstand beside it. I locked the door out of habit, even though I knew it wouldn't do much if someone really wanted to get inside. I crawled under the blankets, staring at the ceiling, listening. The wind had picked up, rattling the windows. Somewhere in the distance, an owl hooted, and then I heard it again. Footsteps, slow, deliberate, but this time they weren't in the woods. They were on the porch. I froze, my breath caught in my throat. The floorboards creaked under the weight of something heavy. My mind raced. I hadn't heard a car. No one knew I was here. I had locked the door, hadn't I? My pulse thundered in my ears as I listened, waiting for whatever was out there to move again. Silence. Then the doorknob rattled. A cold wave of fear washed over me. I stayed perfectly still, barely even breathing. The knob jiggled again, more forcefully this time. Whoever was outside was trying to get in. I reached for my bag on the floor beside the bed, fumbling for the small knife I always carried. It wasn't much, but it was something. My mind screamed at me to do something, to run, to hide, but I couldn't move. I was frozen in place, waiting for whatever was outside to make the next move. And then, just as suddenly as it had started, it stopped. The footsteps retreated, moving off the porch, back into the woods. I waited, listening as the sound faded into the distance. I stayed awake the rest of the night, gripping the knife so tightly that my hand ached. I didn't sleep. I barely even moved. I just listened, waiting for the footsteps to return. By morning, I had convinced myself that I needed to leave. I packed my bags in record time, threw everything into the car, and started the engine. As I pulled away from the cabin, I glanced in the rearview mirror one last time, and that's when I saw it. Standing at the edge of the tree line, partially hidden by the branches, was a figure. Tall, unmoving, watching. I couldn't make out a face, just the outline of a person standing there, completely still. I didn't stop. I didn't slow down. I drove faster than I ever had in my life, not daring to look back again. It wasn't until I reached the main road, until I saw other cars and the familiarity of civilization, that I let out the breath I had been holding. I don't know who or what was out there that night. I don't want to know. I'll never go back to that cabin. And even now, long after it happened, I can still hear the sound of those footsteps in my head. Slow, deliberate, closer. I don't know why I rented that cabin. I tell myself it was just for a quiet break. But deep down, I think I wanted to prove something. To myself, maybe, that I wasn't scared of being alone in the woods. That I could handle the quiet, the darkness, the isolation. But looking back now, I know I made a mistake. The cabin was about 15 miles from the nearest town, hidden deep in the woods, only accessible by a long dirt road that twisted through thick trees. It was an old place, built sometime in the 1950s, judging by the worn wooden walls and the outdated appliances inside. The listing had called it rustic, but that was just a polite way of saying it was run down. The front door stuck when you tried to open it, the floor creaked no matter how lightly you stepped, and the air inside smelled like old wood and dust. I had planned to stay for a week. Just me, my books, and the quiet. No internet, no cell service, no distractions. It sounded perfect at the time. I unpacked quickly, just a duffel bag with clothes, some canned food, a flashlight, and a few other essentials. The cabin had a small kitchen, a bedroom with a single bed, and a living area with an old couch that sagged in the middle. There was a fireplace, though I wasn't planning on using it. I didn't trust the chimney. The first night was uneventful. The woods were silent except for the occasional sound of wind rustling the trees. I sat on the porch for a while, staring out into the darkness, trying to enjoy the solitude. But there was something about the silence that unsettled me. I told myself it was just because I wasn't used to it, that I'd get comfortable in a day or two. I was wrong. The second night, I started noticing small things. First, it was just a vague feeling, that eerie sense that someone was watching me. I ignored it, but then I woke up in the middle of the night to a sound outside. It wasn't an animal. It was steady, deliberate, footsteps on the porch. I held my breath, my heart hammering in my chest. I listened, waiting for whoever or whatever was out there to knock or try the door. But after a few minutes, the footsteps just stopped. I stayed awake for hours, clutching the flashlight in my shaking hand, but nothing else happened. When morning came, I convinced myself it had been my imagination. The next night, I locked the door and wedged a chair under the handle. I wasn't taking any chances. I went to bed early, exhausted from barely sleeping the night before. I had just started to drift off when I heard it again. Footsteps, slow and careful. I held my breath, listening. Then something even worse happened. The doorknob moved, not just a little, turned like someone was trying to get in. I sat up in bed, my body frozen in pure fear. The chair under the handle kept it from turning all the way, but whoever was out there kept trying. A quiet, persistent sound. Click, click, click. I grabbed the flashlight and shined it toward the window, hoping to catch a glimpse of whoever was outside. But I saw nothing, just the dark trees pressing against the glass. Then, just as suddenly as it started, the sound stopped. I sat there, gripping the flashlight, waiting for the next noise. But there was nothing. I didn't sleep that night. I just sat in bed, listening, heart pounding, my mind racing through every possibility. A bear? No, bears don't try to open doors. Person? Maybe, but why would they come all the way out here just to scare me? And why not say something? Why not knock? Morning finally came, and with it, the illusion of safety. I stepped outside, my body tense, scanning the trees. The porch was empty. No footprints, no signs that anyone had been there. I told myself I was being paranoid, that the old cabin was making noises I wasn't used to, that I was scaring myself over nothing. But on the fourth night, I woke up to something even worse. The sound of breathing, not mine, someone else's, right outside the bedroom window. Slow, deep, steady. I didn't move, didn't even blink, just lay there paralyzed, listening. The breathing stayed there for what felt like forever. Then, without warning, it stopped. Not faded away, just stopped, like whoever was out there had been holding their breath, listening for me. I stayed in bed until sunrise, barely daring to move. When the sun finally came up, I packed my bag in record time. I didn't care how ridiculous I looked leaving 3 days early. I just wanted out. I rushed to my car, my hands shaking as I fumbled with the keys. But the car wouldn't start. I turned the key over and over, but the engine just clicked. My stomach dropped. I popped the hood, pretending I knew what I was doing, but I didn't have to be a mechanic to see the problem. The engine cables were cut. Someone had done this, deliberately. I stood there, feeling my breath quicken, my pulse hammering in my ears. My only way out of there was useless. I was trapped. I sprinted back inside, locking the door behind me. I tried my phone, even though I knew there was no service. Nothing. I was completely alone. I spent the entire day locked inside, jumping at every sound. I didn't eat, didn't drink, just sat there, waiting for nightfall, dreading it. That night was the worst. I heard them outside, more than one, footsteps moving around the cabin. Slow, careful. They weren't trying to get in this time, just walking, pacing. I sat there in the dark, gripping a kitchen knife, every muscle in my body locked tight. They stayed out there for hours. Then, just before sunrise, I heard something slip through the mail slot in the door. Piece of paper. I waited until the footsteps disappeared before moving to grab it. One word, scrawled in shaky handwriting. Run. I didn't hesitate. As soon as the sun was up, I grabbed my bag and ran. I didn't care where I was going. I just knew I had to move. I hiked through the woods, using my phone's GPS to guide me back to the main road. Took hours. My legs burned, my lungs ached, but I didn't stop. I kept going until I finally saw a car in the distance, driving toward town. I stumbled into the road, waving my arms like a madman. The driver, a middle-aged guy in a pickup, rolled down his window, eyes wide. "You okay?" he asked. I didn't even know how to answer that. I just climbed into his truck, shaking, and told him to get me the hell out of there. I never went back to that cabin. I don't even know who owns it. I never told anyone the full story, either. But sometimes, late at night, I still hear those footsteps in my head. The slow, careful steps of someone who knew I was alone. Someone who wanted me to know they were out there. And I still wonder what would have happened if I hadn't run. The drive up to the cabin was longer than I remembered. The road twisted through the mountains, each turn making me feel further from everything familiar. I hadn't been up here since I was a kid, but when my uncle passed and left the place to me, I figured a weekend alone might be good. Some time to clear my head, to think. The place was exactly how I remembered. Old, weathered, quiet. The trees pressed in around it, their branches bare this time of year. Snow still clung to the higher peaks, but down here everything was damp and brown. I parked my truck and sat there for a minute, staring at the cabin. The windows were dark. The air smelled of wet earth and pine. The first thing I noticed when I stepped inside was the cold. The fireplace hadn't been used in years, and the chill had settled deep into the wooden walls. I dropped my bag by the couch and checked the place over. Everything was the same. The old wooden furniture, the dusty bookshelves, the kitchen with its outdated appliances. The only difference was the silence. When I was a kid, my uncle had always been here. Now it was just me. I found the old woodpile out back, split a few logs and got a fire going. The heat spread slowly, the flames casting flickering shadows along the walls. Felt better after that, less empty. I made some coffee, sat on the couch and let myself relax. The wind howled outside, rattling the windows. It was peaceful in a way, being so far from everything. The first strange thing happened that night. I was lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, when I heard something outside. It wasn't the wind. It was a steady crunching sound, like footsteps in the dead leaves. Slow, deliberate. I held my breath, listening. It stopped. Just as I was starting to think I imagined it, it started again, circling the cabin. I sat up and grabbed the flashlight from my bag. I didn't turn it on right away, just crept to the window and looked out. Nothing but darkness. I could barely make out the trees, their black shapes shifting in the wind. I told myself it was an animal, maybe a deer, but I couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't. Eventually, the sound stopped. I stayed up a while longer listening, but nothing else happened. I told myself I was being paranoid. New place, alone, my mind playing tricks on me. I went back to bed but didn't sleep much. The next morning I found tracks. Not animal tracks, footprints. They circled the cabin, then disappeared into the trees. They weren't mine. They were fresh. I stared at them for a long time, my breath clouding in the cold air. Someone had been out here last night, walking around while I was inside. Watching, I checked my truck. Nothing was missing. The cabin door was still locked. Whoever it was, they hadn't tried to get in. That didn't make me feel better. I spent the day chopping wood, trying to keep my mind busy. The feeling never left, though, that sense of being watched. The woods were too quiet. No birds, no animals, just the wind. That night, it happened again. I had locked the doors, shut the curtains, but it didn't matter. The sound started around midnight, slow footsteps, circling. I sat in the dark, holding the flashlight, waiting. I wanted to believe it was some hunter, some lost hiker, but deep down I knew better. No one should be out here, not this far up the mountain, not at this hour. I forced myself to check outside. I held the flashlight close to my chest, flicked it on, and stepped onto the porch. The beam cut through the dark, illuminating the trees. Nothing. The tracks from the night before were still there, but no new ones. The wind moved through the trees, a slow whispering sound. I felt exposed, standing out there, like something was just beyond the light watching. I went back inside, locked the door, and sat up with the fire burning low. I told myself I'd leave in the morning. No point staying another night. But morning came, and my truck wouldn't start. I popped the hood, checked the battery, but I didn't really know what I was looking for. It had been fine yesterday. Now it was dead. I tried my phone. No signal. Not even a flicker. I was stuck. I spent the day trying to keep myself busy, but every time I looked at the tree line, I had that same feeling, like something was just beyond my sight, waiting. The tracks were still there. I followed them this time deep into the woods. They went in a straight line for a while, then suddenly stopped. No sign of turning around, no broken branches, no disturbed leaves, just gone, like whoever made them had vanished. That night I didn't sleep. I kept the fire going, listened for sounds. Hours passed, the wind howling. Then, just past 3 in the morning, I heard it. The doorknob rattled. I froze. The sound was soft, testing. Not the wind, not an animal. Someone was trying the door. Then, footsteps, slow, deliberate, moving around the cabin. My hands were shaking as I grabbed the fire poker. The footsteps stopped beneath the window. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. Then something pressed against the glass. Couldn't see it. The curtains were drawn, but I heard it. A soft, slow exhale. Whoever it was, they were standing right outside, breathing against the window. I gripped the poker tighter, waiting. Then nothing. Minutes passed. then an hour. I didn't hear them leave, but when I finally worked up the nerve to check, they were gone. Morning came and I tried the truck again. This time it started. I didn't question it. I threw my bag in the cab and left without looking back. As I drove down the mountain, I glanced in the rearview mirror. Just once. The cabin was still there, small and dark against the trees. And at the edge of the woods, just before the trees swallowed the view, I saw it. A figure, standing perfectly still, watching me leave. I didn't go back. I don't know why I came up here alone. Maybe I wanted the silence. Maybe I wanted the isolation. Maybe I wanted to prove something to myself. But now I just want to leave. I rented the cabin for a week. A small one-bedroom place deep in the woods, miles from the nearest town. The listing had called it a peaceful retreat from the modern world. That's what I thought I wanted. Some time away from everything, away from people, away from my life. I imagined long, quiet mornings with coffee on the porch, afternoons spent reading, maybe some hiking, just time to clear my head. The photos made it look rustic but comfortable. Nothing fancy, but nothing too rough either. Getting here was harder than I expected. The directions were vague, and the road was barely more than a dirt path cutting through the forest. The deeper I drove, the worse it got. Ruts, loose gravel, sharp turns. My tires slipped more than once, and I started to wonder if I'd made a mistake. By the time I finally reached the cabin, my hands were sore from gripping the wheel so hard. The place was exactly like the pictures. Dark wooden walls, a slanted tin roof, a wraparound porch with an old rocking chair. There was a small woodpile stacked beside the door, a fire pit a few feet away. No neighbors in sight, nothing but trees stretching in every direction. Inside, it was small but clean. A main room with a couch, a wood-burning stove, a tiny kitchen with a gas stove and an old fridge. The bedroom was barely big enough for the bed. The bathroom had a toilet and a shower that looked like it hadn't been updated in decades. No Wi-Fi, no service. That was part of the appeal, I reminded myself. A real escape, just me and nature. The first night was fine. I read by lantern light, listened to the fire crackle. It was quiet, really quiet, in a way I wasn't used to. No cars, no distant hum of a city. Just wind in the trees, the occasional creak of the cabin settling. When I went to bed, I fell asleep almost immediately, but something woke me up in the middle of the night. It was subtle, a noise, faint but distinct, a rustling sound, maybe something moving outside. I lay still, holding my breath, trying to listen past the pounding in my ears. Could have been anything, wind, an animal, branches shifting. But it didn't sound random. It sounded deliberate. I told myself it was just the forest. I rolled over, pulled the blanket tighter, and forced myself to go back to sleep. The next morning, I found something strange. The woodpile by the door, some of the logs had been moved. Not just knocked over, but rearranged, like someone had shifted them around, stacked them differently. I tried to convince myself I was just remembering it wrong. Maybe I had moved them myself without realizing it. But it nagged at me. I spent the day hiking, trying to shake the unease. The trails were overgrown, barely marked. I followed one for a couple of hours, but the whole time I felt off, like I was being watched, like something was just beyond my line of sight, keeping pace with me. Every so often, I'd stop and look around, but there was nothing, just trees. The feeling didn't go away until I was back at the cabin. That night, the noise came again, louder this time, a scraping sound right outside the wall near my bed. Then a soft thud. I sat up, my breath caught in my throat. I waited, ears straining. Another noise like footsteps, slow and careful. I grabbed the flashlight from the nightstand and forced myself to move. I crept to the window, barely breathing, and angled the light through the glass. Nothing, but the woods looked different. The trees seemed closer somehow, like the edge of the forest had shifted. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. The next morning, I found something else. Footprints. Not boots, not shoes. Bare feet, leading from the woods to my porch, then back again. I wanted to leave. I should have left. but my car wouldn't start. The engine cranked but wouldn't turn over. I checked my phone, still no service. I wasn't sure what to do. I had food and water. I could wait it out. Maybe it was just my battery. Maybe it would start in the morning. That night, I barricaded the door with the couch. I sat up with the flashlight, gripping the handle of the biggest kitchen knife I had. I tried to stay awake, but exhaustion caught up with me. I woke to the sound of something breathing on the other side of the door. Long, slow inhales, exhales, steady, patient. Then the doorknob turned. I held my breath, listened. It didn't rattle, didn't shake. Just a slow, deliberate turn. Testing, checking, then silence. Morning came and I forced myself outside. The footprints were back. More of them, circling the cabin. I didn't think. I just ran. Down the path toward where I knew the road was. My legs burned, my chest ached, but I didn't stop. The trees blurred past me. My only thought was to get away. And then I saw it. My car. The hood was up, the engine exposed, and someone was standing beside it. Not a person, a shape, tall, thin, too long, too still, his head tilted as if listening. Then it took a step toward me. I turned and ran. I don't remember how far I made it before I collapsed. When I woke, it was dark. I was lying in the dirt, my body stiff with cold. I didn't know where I was, but I wasn't alone. I could hear them, the breathing, close, too close. I didn't move, didn't breathe. I just listened as they surrounded me, and then one by one, they stepped back into the trees. The last thing I saw before everything went black was the cabin. The door was open, waiting. I don't know why I came back here. Maybe it was guilt. Maybe I thought facing it would make it better. But now, sitting in this old cabin, I know I made a mistake. The place is smaller than I remember. The walls are dark with age, and the air is thick with the scent of rotting wood and mildew. Dust hangs in the air, swirling in the dim light filtering through the grimy windows. The wooden floor creaks under my weight as I move. Each step a reminder that this place has been left alone for too long. But the worst part is how quiet it is. Too quiet. I used to come here with my dad when I was a kid. He built this place himself, a getaway deep in the woods, miles from the nearest road. He always said it was a place to escape, but to me, it always felt like a place to be trapped. No cell service, no electricity, no neighbors, just trees stretching for miles in every direction. Place where no one could hear you scream. The last time I was here, I was 13. The memory is blurry, but I remember the fear. I remember waking up in the middle of the night to the sound of something moving outside. Heavy, deliberate footsteps circling the cabin. I remember my dad grabbing his rifle, telling me to stay put, and then stepping out onto the porch. The door swung shut behind him, and then nothing. He never came back inside. They searched for weeks, but they never found him. No blood, no tracks, no sign of a struggle. Just his rifle lying on the porch with the safety still on. They called it a disappearance. Some said he got lost, some said he ran away. But I knew better. I knew something took him, something that made no sound, left no trace. Something that watched me from the trees as I ran screaming through the woods the next morning, searching for help. I swore I would never come back. And yet, here I am, 20 years later, standing in the same cabin, listening to the same silence. The first night is uneventful. I lock the doors, check the windows, and lie awake in my sleeping bag, staring at the ceiling. Every sound makes my skin crawl. The wind through the trees, the creak of the old walls settling. But nothing happens. The second night, I hear it. It starts as a faint rustling outside. Then footsteps, slow, deliberate, moving around the cabin, just like before. I sit up, my heart pounding. I grab the old hunting knife I brought with me, gripping it so tight my fingers ache. The footsteps stop. Silence presses in, so heavy I can hear the blood rushing in my ears. I force myself to breathe, to think. Maybe it's an animal. Maybe it's my imagination. Then, a long, slow scrape against the front door. I don't move. I don't breathe. I just sit there, my eyes locked on the door, waiting. The scrape comes again, longer this time, like something dragging a claw or a blade along the wood. Then, nothing. I don't sleep. I don't move until the sun comes up. When I finally find the courage to check the door, there are no marks. No signs that anything was ever there. I tell myself it was the wind, but I know better. By the third night, I'm ready to leave. I pack my things, make sure my knife is close, and sit in the chair by the door waiting for morning. The footsteps come again earlier this time, pacing around the cabin. Slow, steady, like whoever, whatever it is knows I'm inside, knows I'm listening. Then the breathing starts, soft at first, a whisper of air against the door, then louder, heavy, uneven, like something big standing just outside, exhaling in slow, shuddering gasps. I grip the knife so hard my knuckles crack. I want to run, but there's nowhere to go. The nearest road is 5 miles away, and whatever is outside would hear me the moment I moved. Then, something presses against the door. A slow, deliberate weight. The wood creaks, the frame groans. I can see the door bow inward just slightly under the pressure. I stop breathing. The pressure vanishes. Then, the sound of retreating footsteps. Slow, dragging, fading into the trees. I don't wait for morning. I grab my bag, my knife, and I run. The woods are dark, the moon barely enough to see by. Every sound makes my skin crawl. Every shadow feels like it's watching me. My legs burn, my lungs ache, but I don't stop. I don't slow down until I see the road, the asphalt glowing faintly in the moonlight. I turn back just once, just long enough to see the dark shape standing at the tree line, watching me. Too tall, too thin. No face, no eyes, just a shadow among shadows, still as death. I don't go back. Not for the car, not for my things. I leave it all behind. Some places aren't meant to be returned to. Some questions aren't meant to be answered. And some things, once they've noticed you, never really go away. I don't know what made me take the trip alone. Maybe I just wanted the quiet. Maybe I wanted to prove to myself that I wasn't afraid of being alone in the woods. I booked the cabin on a whim, found it on some off-the-grid website. A simple wooden structure, no Wi-Fi, no cell service, just a lake nearby and miles of trees. It sounded perfect. I drove up on a Monday, took the winding road deep into the forest until the gravel turned into a dirt path. The cabin sat in a clearing, surrounded by thick pine trees. It was small, only one floor, with a single bedroom, a tiny kitchen, and a living area with a fireplace. There was an old wooden dock stretching out into the lake, but the water looked too still, too dark. I unloaded my supplies, canned food, bottled water, a flashlight, and a knife, just in case. The front door had one of those old iron locks, the kind you slide into place. Inside, the air smelled of damp wood, like it had been empty for a long time. The first night was fine. I made a fire, ate some canned soup, and read by lantern light. It felt good to be disconnected. The silence was thick, but I told myself I liked it. The only sound was the wind in the trees and the occasional crack of settling wood. I locked the door before bed and kept the knife close. The second night, I started noticing small things. I woke up to find the front door unlocked. I was sure I had locked it. The wind, maybe. The old wood shifting. I convinced myself of that. But the feeling of being watched started creeping in. I shook it off and went about my day. Walked the perimeter of the cabin, checked the dock, looked for any signs of animals. The ground was covered in dead leaves, soft earth. No tracks, no disturbances. The only footprints were my own. I forced myself to stop being paranoid. The forest had a way of making you feel like you weren't alone, even when you were. That night, I woke up again, but this time, it wasn't the door. It was a noise, something moving outside, slow, deliberate. Not the wind, not a deer. A shuffling, careful sound, like someone trying not to be heard. I stayed in bed, barely breathing, gripping the knife. The sound moved around the cabin. Then it stopped, right outside my window. I didn't move. I didn't dare to look. Minutes passed, then hours. I told myself I imagined it, but I knew I didn't. The next morning, I found something at the edge of the clearing. A small pile of rocks stacked carefully on top of each other, right where the trees started. I hadn't seen it the day before. It hadn't been there. I knocked it over even though I wasn't sure why. Maybe I just wanted to prove something to myself. Maybe I wanted to send a message. That night, I heard the noise again, but this time there were footsteps. Slow, heavy, moving toward the door. The iron lock was in place. I didn't breathe. The footsteps stopped. Then the doorknob turned. I gripped the knife so hard my hand shook. The doorknob rattled once more, then silence. Hours passed before I moved. Morning came and I wanted to leave, but my car was parked a 15-minute walk away, down the dirt path, and every instinct told me I shouldn't step outside. Not yet. I waited until the sun was high, then I ran. I left everything, my bag, my supplies. I just ran. When I reached my car, the driver's side door was open. I knew I had locked it. I knew. The inside was empty, nothing stolen, nothing moved. Just that door hanging open, waiting for me. I got in, locked it, started the engine. The moment I looked up at the rearview mirror, I felt it. The cabin, the trees, the feeling that something had watched me leave. Something that wasn't done with me yet. I never went back. I don't know why I agreed to it. Maybe it was the stress of work, the need for fresh air, or just the fact that I let my brother talk me into things too easily. But when he suggested a 3-day camping trip in the woods, I said yes. It was supposed to be an escape. Just the two of us, a tent, and the wilderness. No phones, no distractions, just peace. We drove out early, packed light but enough to survive. The plan was simple. Hike about 10 miles into the forest, set up camp near a river, and spend a few days unwinding. The place was remote. No campsites, no trails, just a patch of forest he swore was perfect. The first day was fine. The hike was long and exhausting, but the spot we found was beautiful. A clearing just a few feet from the river, surrounded by towering trees. The sound of running water filled the air, and for the first time in months, I felt relaxed. We set up the tent, gathered wood for a fire, and cooked a simple meal. Felt good to be out there, away from everything. That night, the forest was alive with noises. Crickets, owls, the distant howl of some animal. It wasn't unsettling at first, just part of nature. But as the night went on, I started noticing something off. The sounds would stop suddenly, like everything in the woods was holding its breath. It would last for a few minutes, then the noises would slowly come back. I told myself it was just my imagination and eventually drifted off to sleep. The second day was uneventful. We spent it exploring, fishing, and just relaxing. The only strange thing was the feeling of being watched. It was subtle, but every now and then, I'd get this tightness in my stomach, like someone was behind me. I chalked it up to being deep in the woods. Our minds play tricks on us when we're not used to being isolated. That night, things got worse. The silence came again, but this time it lasted longer. I was lying in my sleeping bag, staring at the roof of the tent when I heard something outside. It wasn't an animal. It was footsteps, slow, deliberate, not heavy enough to be a bear, not quick enough to be a deer. Human footsteps. I didn't move. My breath felt loud in my chest. My brother was already asleep, snoring lightly beside me. I listened, heart pounding, as the footsteps circled our tent. They were close, just a few feet away. Then, nothing, just silence. I waited, listening, every muscle in my body tense. After what felt like forever, the forest sounds returned. Crickets, the river, everything was back to normal. I told myself it was nothing, maybe just a trick of my mind, and somehow I fell asleep. Morning came, and I almost convinced myself it had been a dream. Almost. But then I saw the footprints. They weren't ours. We had been careful about where we stepped, and these prints were fresh, leading around our tent. Someone had been out there, watching us. I woke my brother up and showed him. He didn't seem as concerned as I was. "Probably some hunter or hiker," he shrugged. "We're not the only people who come out here." That didn't sit right with me. We hadn't seen a single person since we left the car. No signs of hikers, no distant gunshots from hunters. Just us. If someone was out there, they weren't supposed to be. We argued about leaving. He wanted to stay, said we were overreacting. I wasn't so sure, but I let him talk me into staying one more night. We spent the day trying to enjoy ourselves, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The woods felt different, heavier. I kept glancing over my shoulder, convinced we weren't alone. By the time night fell, I was on edge. The fire crackled, casting shadows that flickered across the trees. We ate in silence, listening to the sounds of the forest. Then the silence came again. No crickets, no owls, just a dead, suffocating quiet. My stomach twisted. I stared at my brother, and for the first time I saw fear in his eyes. Something moved in the darkness. A twig snapped, then another. My hands clenched into fists. The footsteps started again, slow and measured. They were coming closer. Then the breathing. It was soft, just beyond the firelight. Something was standing in the dark, watching us. I grabbed the hatchet we had brought for chopping wood and stood up. My brother did the same. We didn't speak, didn't move, just listened. The breathing stopped. The silence stretched on, thick and unnatural. Then, without warning, the footsteps started again. But this time they were running, fast, toward us. I didn't think. I just reacted. I grabbed my flashlight and shined it into the trees. Nothing. No movement. No figure. Just trees and shadows. The footsteps had stopped as suddenly as they had started. The silence was overwhelming. "We're leaving," I whispered. My brother didn't argue. We packed up in record time, barely speaking. Every rustle of the leaves, every crack of a branch, sent jolts of panic through me. I kept the flashlight scanning the trees, expecting to see someone watching. But there was nothing, just that suffocating feeling of being watched. The hike back was brutal. We didn't stop, didn't rest, just kept moving, pushing through exhaustion and fear. The whole way back, I felt it. That same presence, the same eyes, watching. When we finally reached the car, we threw our gear inside and locked the doors. My hands were shaking as I turned the key. The engine roared to life, and we sped out of there, leaving the woods behind. We didn't talk much on the way home. What was there to say? We both knew what had happened. Someone had been out there. Someone had watched us, stalked us. We never went back. I don't go camping anymore. I can't. Even now, years later, I still get that feeling sometimes. That tightness in my stomach, like someone is behind me, watching, waiting, because whoever was out there that night, they never wanted us to leave. I don't know why I agreed to it. Maybe it was the stress of work, the need for fresh air, or just the fact that I let my brother talk me into things too easily. But when he suggested a 3-day camping trip in the woods, I said yes. It was supposed to be an escape. Just the two of us, a tent, and the wilderness. No phones, no distractions, just peace. We drove out early, packed light but enough to survive. The plan was simple. Hike about 10 miles into the forest, set up camp near a river, and spend a few days unwinding. The place was remote. No campsites, no trails, just a patch of forest he swore was perfect. The first day was fine. The hike was long and exhausting, but the spot we found was beautiful. A clearing just a few feet from the river, surrounded by towering trees. The sound of running water filled the air, and for the first time in months, I felt relaxed. We set up the tent, gathered wood for a fire, and cooked a simple meal. Felt good to be out there, away from everything. That night, the forest was alive with noises. Crickets, owls, the distant howl of some animal. It wasn't unsettling at first, just part of nature. But as the night went on, I started noticing something off. The sounds would stop suddenly, like everything in the woods was holding its breath. It would last for a few minutes, then the noises would slowly come back. I told myself it was just my imagination and eventually drifted off to sleep. The second day was uneventful. We spent it exploring, fishing, and just relaxing. The only strange thing was the feeling of being watched. It was subtle, but every now and then, I'd get this tightness in my stomach, like someone was behind me. I chalked it up to being deep in the woods. Our minds play tricks on us when we're not used to being isolated. That night, things got worse. The silence came again, but this time it lasted longer. I was lying in my sleeping bag, staring at the roof of the tent when I heard something outside. It wasn't an animal. It was footsteps, slow, deliberate, not heavy enough to be a bear, not quick enough to be a deer. Human footsteps. I didn't move. My breath felt loud in my chest. My brother was already asleep, snoring lightly beside me. I listened, heart pounding, as the footsteps circled our tent. They were close, just a few feet away. Then, nothing, just silence. I waited, listening, every muscle in my body tense. After what felt like forever, the forest sounds returned. Crickets, the river, everything was back to normal. I told myself it was nothing, maybe just a trick of my mind, and somehow I fell asleep. Morning came, and I almost convinced myself it had been a dream. Almost. But then I saw the footprints. They weren't ours. We had been careful about where we stepped, and these prints were fresh, leading around our tent. Someone had been out there, watching us. I woke my brother up and showed him. He didn't seem as concerned as I was. Probably some hunter or hiker, he shrugged. We're not the only people who come out here. That didn't sit right with me. We hadn't seen a single person since we left the car. No signs of hikers, no distant gunshots from hunters. Just us. If someone was out there, they weren't supposed to be. We argued about leaving. He wanted to stay, said we were overreacting. I wasn't so sure, but I let him talk me into staying one more night. We spent the day trying to enjoy ourselves, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The woods felt different, heavier. I kept glancing over my shoulder, convinced we weren't alone. By the time night fell, I was on edge. The fire crackled, casting shadows that flickered across the trees. We ate in silence, listening to the sounds of the forest. Then the silence came again. No crickets, no owls, just a dead, suffocating quiet. My stomach twisted. I stared at my brother, and for the first time I saw fear in his eyes. Something moved in the darkness. A twig snapped, then another. My hands clenched into fists. The footsteps started again, slow and measured. They were coming closer. Then the breathing. It was soft, just beyond the firelight. Something was standing in the dark, watching us. I grabbed the hatchet we had brought for chopping wood and stood up. My brother did the same. We didn't speak, didn't move, just listened. The breathing stopped. The silence stretched on, thick and unnatural. Then, without warning, the footsteps started again. But this time they were running, fast, toward us. I didn't think. I just reacted. I grabbed my flashlight and shined it into the trees. Nothing. No movement. No figure. Just trees and shadows. The footsteps had stopped as suddenly as they had started. The silence was overwhelming. "We're leaving," I whispered. My brother didn't argue. We packed up in record time, barely speaking. Every rustle of the leaves, every crack of a branch, sent jolts of panic through me. I kept the flashlight scanning the trees, expecting to see someone watching. But there was nothing, just that suffocating feeling of being watched. The hike back was brutal. We didn't stop, didn't rest, just kept moving, pushing through exhaustion and fear. The whole way back, I felt it. That same presence, the same eyes, watching. When we finally reached the car, we threw our gear inside and locked the doors. My hands were shaking as I turned the key. The engine roared to life, and we sped out of there, leaving the woods behind. We didn't talk much on the way home. What was there to say? We both knew what had happened. Someone had been out there. Someone had watched us, stalked us. We never went back. I don't go camping anymore. I can't. Even now, years later, I still get that feeling sometimes. that tightness in my stomach, like someone is behind me, watching, waiting, because whoever was out there that night, they never wanted us to leave. I always loved the quiet of the woods, the way the world seemed to slow down, the way the trees stood tall and motionless like silent watchers over time. Camping alone wasn't a new thing for me. I had done it many times before, always preferring the solitude over the crowded campgrounds filled with families and their blaring radios. But this one was different. And if I could go back, I'd never have set foot in those woods. I picked a spot deep in the national forest, far from any main roads or designated campsites. I had studied the maps carefully, choosing a location next to a small, unnamed lake. It wasn't marked as a popular spot, which made it perfect. No other campers, no random hikers passing by, just me and the wilderness. I parked my truck along a dirt road and hiked in about 5 miles, the crisp autumn air making the walk easier than expected. By the time I set up camp, the sun was beginning to dip below the horizon. I worked quickly, pitching my small tent, gathering firewood, and getting everything in place before the darkness fully settled. The first night was uneventful. The wind rustled through the trees, an owl hooted in the distance, and the occasional crack of a branch reminded me that I was not alone, though it was just the usual wildlife. The second day was when things began to feel off. I woke early and decided to explore. I followed a narrow game trail that led away from the lake, hoping to find a better vantage point. After about an hour of walking, I stumbled across something strange. In a small clearing, there was an old fire pit surrounded by stones, long abandoned. But the thing that caught my attention was the wooden structure next to it. It wasn't quite a cabin, more of a rough shelter made from logs and covered with a thick layer of dirt and moss. It looked ancient, like it had been there for decades, possibly longer. I stepped closer, peering inside. The entrance was just a hole, large enough for a person to crawl through. The inside was dark, and the air that seeped out smelled damp and earthy. Something about it unsettled me. I wasn't easily scared, but the place had a presence, a feeling that told me I shouldn't be there. I backed away and turned to leave, but that's when I saw it. Footprints, fresh ones, leading away from the shelter and disappearing into the trees. My heart thudded in my chest as I knelt down to examine them. They were human, no doubt about it, barefoot, and they weren't old. I stood up quickly, scanning the woods around me, but there was nothing, just silence. I told myself it was probably an old hunter's shelter, that maybe some drifter or survivalist had been using it. But the prints, they were so fresh, too fresh. I hurried back to my camp, forcing myself to shake off the uneasy feeling. I built up my fire bigger than usual that night, the crackling flames making me feel a little safer. The night passed without incident, though I woke several times, convinced I had heard something moving just beyond the firelight. The third day, I decided to leave. I had planned for a longer trip, but something deep in my gut told me it was time to go. I packed up my gear quickly, glancing over my shoulder more times than I could count. The woods felt different now, like they were watching me. I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. The hike back to my truck was tense. Every little sound made me jump. A bird flapping its wings, the rustle of leaves, the snap of a twig. It all sent a rush of adrenaline through me. I walked fast, almost too fast, my breath coming out in short bursts. When I finally reached the dirt road, relief flooded through me. My truck was exactly where I had left it. But as I got closer, something made me stop in my tracks. There, in the dirt next to my truck, were more footprints, barefoot, the same as the ones I had seen near the shelter. They led up to the driver's side door, then back into the woods. I didn't waste another second. I jumped into my truck, locked the doors, and started the engine. As I pulled away, my eyes flicked to the rearview mirror, half expecting to see someone standing at the edge of the trees, watching me. But there was nothing, just the empty road and the dense forest stretching out behind me. I didn't stop until I was miles away, back on the main highway. My hands were gripping the steering wheel so tightly that my knuckles were white. I didn't know who or what had been out there with me, but I knew one thing for sure. I was never going back to that place. And even now, months later, I still think about those footprints, about how they led right up to my truck, about how somehow whoever it was had known where I was, and about how they had watched me leave. I have always loved the outdoors. There's something about the silence of nature, the cold bite of the wind at night, and the warm glow of a campfire that makes me feel at peace. I used to go camping a lot when I was younger, mostly with my dad, but as I got older, I started going alone. There was something about the solitude that I enjoyed. No phones, no distractions, just me and the wilderness. A few years ago, I took a trip deep into the woods of northern Montana. I had been there once before, but only for a short hike. This time, I wanted to spend a few nights completely cut off from civilization. I packed everything I needed: tent, food, water, a hunting knife, and my rifle. Not that I expected to use it, but you never know. Wild animals are always a possibility, especially in a place as remote as this. The first day was perfect. I hiked for miles through dense forest, crossing small streams and climbing over fallen trees. The deeper I went, the quieter it became. No sounds of cars, no distant hum of a highway, just the rustling of leaves and the occasional chirp of a bird. I found a perfect spot to set up camp near a small clearing. It was far enough from any trails that I knew I wouldn't run into other campers. That was the goal: complete isolation. I set up my tent, gathered some wood for a fire, and cooked a simple meal. As night fell, the temperature dropped significantly. I could see my breath in the air, but the fire kept me warm. I sat there for hours, staring into the flames, enjoying the peace and quiet. The only sound was the occasional crackling of the fire and the wind through the trees. At some point, I heard a noise in the distance. It was faint, almost like a branch snapping. I figured it was just a deer or some other animal moving through the woods. I wasn't concerned. After all, I was the intruder in their territory. I ignored it and eventually crawled into my tent to sleep. I woke up suddenly in the middle of the night. At first, I didn't know why. It was dead silent, which was strange. Normally, even in the middle of the night, you can hear the wind or small animals moving around. But this time, there was nothing, just silence, the kind that makes your ears ring. I sat up and listened, trying to figure out what had woken me. Then I heard it, a soft crunching sound, like leaves being pressed underfoot. Slow, deliberate. It wasn't an animal. Animals move in quick bursts. This was different. It sounded like footsteps. I held my breath, straining to hear more. The footsteps stopped. I waited. Maybe it was just my imagination. Maybe the silence was playing tricks on me. I laid back down, but I didn't close my eyes. Then I heard it again. Closer this time. My heart started to pound. I reached for my rifle, my fingers wrapping around the cold metal. I didn't want to use it, but just having it in my hands made me feel safer. The footsteps moved again, still slow, still deliberate. I wasn't sure if whoever or whatever it was knew I was awake. I considered calling out, but something told me not to. I didn't want to give away my position inside the tent. Then, just as suddenly as they started, the footsteps stopped. I waited. 5 minutes, 10 minutes, nothing. Eventually, I convinced myself that it must have been an animal, and I somehow managed to fall asleep again. The next morning, I stepped out of my tent and looked around. Everything seemed normal at first, but then I noticed something strange. About 20 feet from my campsite, there were footprints, human footprints. They led from the trees toward my tent, then stopped suddenly. No return trail, just a single set of prints leading toward me in the night. I felt a chill run through me. Someone had been out there, watching me, standing there in the darkness, just outside my tent. I looked around, scanning the trees, but I saw nothing. I thought about packing up and leaving, but I had come all this way, and I wasn't about to let paranoia ruin my trip. I spent the day hiking and trying to shake the feeling of unease. By the time I returned to camp, the sun was starting to set. I built a fire again, cooked my dinner, and tried to convince myself that it was just some lost hiker passing through. That night, I barely slept. I kept the rifle close, listening for any sound. But the night was silent again. The kind of silence that makes you feel like something is out there, waiting, watching. The next morning, I checked the area again. No new footprints, no signs of anyone. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. I decided to cut my trip short. I packed up my gear and started the long hike back to my truck. As I walked, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. I kept checking over my shoulder, but every time I looked, the forest was empty. Still, the feeling never left me. The entire hike back, it felt like someone was just out of sight, hiding between the trees. When I finally reached my truck, I let out a sigh of relief. I loaded up my gear and got inside, locking the doors immediately. I sat there for a few minutes, just listening. Nothing, just the wind and the trees. I started the engine and pulled onto the dirt road, leaving the forest behind. But as I drove, I couldn't help but glance in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see something standing at the tree line, watching me leave. I never went back to that spot. I still go camping, but not alone. Never alone. I don't know why I agreed to go. Maybe it was boredom, or maybe I just wanted to get out of the city for a while. Either way, when my friend suggested a weekend camping trip in a remote forest, I didn't hesitate to say yes. I packed my gear, a tent, a sleeping bag, a knife, some food, and a flashlight with extra batteries. I wasn't new to camping, but I wasn't an expert either. I figured it would be a simple trip, just a couple of nights in the woods, away from the noise of everyday life. We drove out early on a Friday morning, heading deep into an area that barely showed up on GPS. After about 3 hours of driving, we reached the trailhead. There was no one else around, just an old wooden sign that marked the start of the trail and a dirt path leading into the thick forest. We parked the car on the side of the gravel road, grabbed our backpacks, and started hiking in. The trail was rough, barely maintained. The deeper we went, the quieter it became. No distant sounds of cars, no other hikers, just the occasional bird or rustling leaves. After about an hour, we found a clearing near a small river. It was a perfect spot. Flat ground, plenty of space, and the sound of running water nearby. We set up our tents, gathered some firewood, and settled in. The first night was uneventful. We sat by the fire, ate some canned food, and talked until we got tired. The air was crisp, and the stars were clearer than I'd ever seen. Around midnight, we put out the fire and went to our tents. I lay in my sleeping bag, listening to the wind in the trees. There was something peaceful about being so far from everything, but that peace didn't last. Sometime in the middle of the night, I woke up to a sound. At first, I thought it was just the wind, but then I heard it again, twigs snapping. Something was moving outside. I held my breath and listened. It wasn't just the occasional rustling. It was deliberate, slow footsteps. I reached for my flashlight and knife, trying to stay as quiet as possible. The footsteps stopped for a moment, then started again, circling the tent. I wanted to call out to my friend, but something told me not to make a sound. I stayed frozen for what felt like hours. Eventually, the sounds faded into the distance. I lay there, gripping my knife, waiting for the first light of morning. When the sun finally came up, I unzipped my tent and stepped outside. My friend was already up, making coffee over the fire. He looked at me and immediately noticed something was wrong. I asked him if he had heard anything last night. He shook his head. I didn't want to sound paranoid, so I brushed it off. Maybe it was just an animal. Maybe I had imagined it. We spent the day fishing in the river and exploring the area. It was almost enough to make me forget about the night before. That night, the footsteps came back. This time, they were louder, closer. I felt my heart pounding as I listened. The steps stopped right outside my tent. I could hear breathing, slow, steady breathing. I gripped my knife so tight my hand started to hurt. Then, something brushed against the side of my tent. It wasn't an animal. It was a hand. I stayed completely still, trying to control my breathing. Then, after a few agonizing minutes, the presence outside my tent moved away. I waited until I couldn't hear it anymore before I finally let out a shaky breath. I barely slept the rest of the night, Morning came and I stepped outside again. This time I saw footprints. Bare human footprints in the dirt, circling our campsite. My friends saw them too. We looked at each other, unspoken fear between us. This wasn't just some animal wandering through the woods. We agreed to leave. We packed up our gear quickly, not talking much. I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. As we made our way back to the trail, I kept looking over my shoulder, half expecting to see someone standing there. But there was nothing. It wasn't until we reached the car that I noticed something that made my stomach drop. Scratched into the dirt on the driver's side door were 3 words: "Don't come back." I don't know who or what was out there, but I never went camping again. I don't think I'll ever go camping again. It was supposed to be a short, simple trip. Just 2 nights out in the mountains, alone. No distractions, no noise, just me, the trees, and the sound of the river nearby. I had done it before, but never completely alone. Something about the idea felt peaceful, like I was pushing myself to find a kind of quiet I could never get at home. But now I know that being alone in the woods isn't peaceful. It's a different kind of noise, a kind that creeps into your bones and sits there, waiting. I parked my truck at the trailhead and strapped my pack tight. The hike in was about 5 miles, following a narrow dirt path that wound through tall pines and overgrown underbrush. The air was crisp, and the late afternoon sun painted everything in gold. It was beautiful, exactly what I had hoped for. I took my time, stepping carefully over rocks and roots, listening to the distant rustling of animals in the bushes. Everything felt alive, but in a way that didn't feel threatening. Not yet. By the time I reached the spot I had picked out on the map, the sun was getting low. It was a small clearing near the river, surrounded on 3 sides by dense trees. I set up my tent, gathered some firewood, and got a small fire going as the sky darkened. It was peaceful, the sound of the river bubbling over rocks, the occasional snap of a twig as some unseen creature moved through the woods. It all felt normal. I cooked a quick meal, sat by the fire, and let the warmth soak into my skin. The first night was quiet, too quiet. I've slept outside enough to know that the woods never truly sleep. There's always something moving, something calling out in the dark. But that night, it felt like the whole forest was holding its breath. I lay there in my tent, staring up at the nylon ceiling, ears straining for something, anything. I told myself it was my imagination, that I just wasn't used to being alone like this. But it didn't help. Every time I drifted off, I woke up again, heart pounding, unsure of why. It was like something was just outside the range of my hearing, something waiting for me to notice it. Morning came, and with it a sense of relief. The sun pushed long shadows through the trees, and the cold night air faded into something warmer. I shook off the unease and went about my morning. Boiled some water, made coffee, ate a protein bar. The day felt normal again. I spent the afternoon exploring. I followed the river upstream, climbed over fallen logs, listened to the wind push through the trees. I didn't see another person. That was expected. This area wasn't heavily trafficked, and I had gone out of my way to pick a spot that was isolated. But as the day went on, that sense of being alone started to feel different. Not peaceful, just wrong. It started with small things. A smell, first. Something faint but rotten, carried by the wind. I brushed it off. Probably a dead animal somewhere nearby. Then there were the trees. Some of them had deep gouges in the bark, long claw marks carved into the wood. Not bear marks. Bears leave wide, rough scratches. These were cleaner, more deliberate. I ran my fingers over them and felt the rawness. The way the wood had been torn apart like something had been angry. I kept moving, tried not to think about it. Then I found the footprints. At first, I thought they were mine. The ground was soft, and my own boot prints trailed behind me. But these were different. Barefoot, deep. Someone had walked through here recently, and not just walked, they had moved fast, the prints uneven like they had been running. I stopped and listened. The forest held its silence. I turned back. By the time I made it back to my campsite, the sun was getting low again. I tried to shake off the unease, telling myself it was just some hiker who had passed through. Maybe a hunter, maybe nothing at all. I made another fire, ate another meal, and sat with my back to the trees, listening. Then, in the middle of the night, I woke up to the sound of footsteps. They weren't far, just outside my tent. Slow, careful. I didn't move. I barely breathed. I just listened. Whoever it was, they stopped right by my fire pit. I could hear the faint crunch of dirt shifting under their weight. Then nothing, just silence. Long, heavy silence. I don't know how long I lay there, waiting. Eventually, I heard them move again, slow, deliberate steps fading back into the woods. I didn't dare look. I didn't dare move until the first light of morning crept through the tent. When I finally unzipped the flap and stepped outside, my stomach dropped. The fire was out. My gear was untouched, but the footprints were back. Dozens of them, circling my tent, stopping just short of the entrance. And alongside them, a single handprint, pressed deep into the dirt. A bare hand, long fingers, deep impressions like whoever left it had leaned in, listening. I packed up and left. I didn't eat. I didn't even take half my gear. I just grabbed what I needed, threw it into my pack, and started hiking. My legs burned, my breath came hard, but I didn't stop. I didn't look back. The whole time I felt it, that weight, that pressure, that knowing. I wasn't alone. The trail stretched longer than I remembered. I pushed forward, legs shaking, stomach twisting with every sound behind me. I don't know if I was being followed. I didn't want to find out. When I finally reached my truck, I felt like I had just surfaced from deep underwater. The moment the doors locked, I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. The engine rumbled to life, and I tore down the dirt road without looking back. I don't know who was out there. I don't want to know. I only know that I will never go camping alone again. I never thought much about fear until that weekend. I had been camping plenty of times before, but nothing ever happened that made me question my safety. I liked being alone in the woods. It was peaceful. It made me feel small in a good way, like the problems of life were just noise in the distance. But that weekend changed everything. That weekend made me realize that sometimes fear is justified. Sometimes you should run. I had planned a solo camping trip in a remote part of the forest, about 20 miles from the nearest town. I wanted to get away from everything: people, work, stress. It was late autumn, and the trees were mostly bare, their skeletal branches reaching toward the gray sky. The air was crisp but not too cold. Perfect weather for camping. I parked my truck at a small dirt pull-off along the side of a rarely used road and hiked about 4 miles into the woods. The deeper I went, the quieter it became. The occasional bird call, the rustling of dry leaves, and my own footsteps were the only sounds. Felt good to be out there alone. I found a clearing beside a small stream and set up camp. I pitched my tent, gathered firewood, and started a fire before it got dark. I cooked a simple meal, ate in silence, and sat by the fire, staring into the flames, letting my mind go blank. It was exactly what I had been craving: complete isolation. Then, things started to feel off. First, it was little things. The woods felt too quiet. I know that sounds like nonsense, but anyone who has spent time in the wilderness knows that even at night, there's always noise. Wind in the trees, distant animal sounds, the occasional crack of a branch. But that night, there was nothing, just silence. I told myself it was fine. I was just overthinking it. I got into my tent, zipped it up, and lay down in my sleeping bag. The fire outside still burned low, casting a faint flickering light through the fabric of my tent. Then, sometime in the middle of the night, I woke up. I didn't know why at first. I just came out of sleep suddenly, heart pounding, senses on high alert. I held my breath, listening. The fire had burned down to embers, barely glowing. The silence was still there, but now it felt heavy, suffocating. And then I heard it. Footsteps. Not the random, erratic sounds of an animal moving through the brush. These were careful, deliberate, slow. Someone was out there. I stayed as still as possible, listening. The footsteps stopped for a long time, then started again. They circled my tent. I had my knife with me, but what good would that do if I couldn't see who or what I was dealing with? My gun was in the truck, for miles away, because I had stupidly thought I wouldn't need it. The footsteps stopped again. Then, the sound of something being placed down near my fire pit. A soft, scraping noise, like fabric against the dirt. Then nothing, just silence. I didn't move. I stayed awake until dawn, every muscle in my body tensed, every sound making my heart pound. The moment there was enough light, I unzipped my tent and looked out. The fire pit was still smoldering, a faint trail of smoke curling into the air. But something was there, right beside the ashes. A small pile of rocks, neatly stacked. My stomach clenched. That hadn't been there the night before. I stood up slowly, scanning the trees. Nothing. No movement, no sound. Whoever or whatever had been out there was gone. I didn't waste time. I packed my gear as fast as possible, my hands shaking. As I was rolling up my sleeping bag, I noticed something else. A thin, deep cut in the fabric of my tent, right above where my head had been while I slept. I don't remember the hike back to my truck. I just remember feeling exposed, like I was being watched the entire time. When I finally reached my truck, I threw my gear into the back and locked the doors the second I was inside. I started the engine and pulled onto the road, speeding back toward town. It wasn't until I was safely home that I let myself think about it. Someone had been out there. Someone had watched me. Someone had come close enough to touch my tent while I was sleeping. And they had left me a message, too, actually. The cut in my tent. The stacked rocks. A warning. I don't camp alone anymore. I don't think I ever will again. I should have known better than to go out there alone. The forest had always felt safe to me, but that weekend changed everything. I left early Friday morning, my old backpack stuffed with supplies. The plan was simple. Hike deep into the woods, find a quiet place to set up camp, and enjoy some solitude. I needed the break from work, from people, from noise. Just me, the trees, and the sound of the wind through the branches. The first few hours were peaceful. The deeper I went, the less I could hear from the outside world. No cars, no distant hum of civilization. Just the rustling of leaves and the occasional snap of a twig under my boots. I took my time, stopping now and then to drink water and adjust my pack. I had mapped out my route in advance and was confident I could find a good spot before sunset. By mid-afternoon, I found a clearing near a small stream. It was perfect. Flat ground, plenty of space, and the sound of running water nearby. I set up my tent, gathered firewood, and took a short walk around the area to get familiar with my surroundings. Nothing seemed out of place, just the endless stretch of trees and the fading light of day. As the sun dipped below the horizon, I got a fire going and cooked a simple meal. The warmth of the flames felt good against the chill creeping in. I sat back, staring at the flickering light, feeling at ease. That feeling didn't last long. It started with a sound. Faint at first somewhere in the distance. A soft, rhythmic thumping, like footsteps but slower, more deliberate. I sat still, listening, but the noise faded away. Probably an animal, I told myself. Nothing to worry about. The night deepened, and I crawled into my tent, zipping it up tight. The air was colder now, the fire casting long shadows against the trees. Sleep didn't come easy, but eventually exhaustion won. I woke up to silence, the kind that felt unnatural. No wind, no insects, nothing, just stillness. I checked my watch, 3:12 a.m. I lay there, staring at the thin fabric of the tent, feeling a strange sense of unease. Then I heard it again, the same slow, deliberate thumping, closer this time. I held my breath, every muscle in my body tense. The sound was coming from the direction of the trees. I listened, trying to make sense of it. It wasn't footsteps, not exactly. It was heavier, almost like something dragging itself forward. I reached for my flashlight and hesitated. If I turned it on, would I regret it? My fingers hovered over the switch. The noise stopped. The silence stretched on, pressing against my ears. I swallowed hard, my throat dry. I wanted to believe it was just an animal, that I was letting my imagination get the best of me. But then I heard something new, breathing, low, ragged, just beyond the thin layer of my tent. My mind raced. There was no way someone else was out here, miles from the nearest road. I hadn't seen a single soul all day. I held my breath, heart pounding. The breathing continued, slow and uneven, as if whoever or whatever it was struggled with each inhale. I wanted to scream, to run, but I forced myself to stay still. If I didn't move, maybe it wouldn't notice me. Minutes passed. Then, just as suddenly as it had started, the breathing stopped. The night returned to silence. I waited, barely daring to breathe myself, until my lungs burned. Then, the sound of retreating steps, that same dragging, shuffling movement, fading back into the woods. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. At the first light of dawn, I unzipped the tent and stepped out. My legs were stiff, my body aching from tension. I scanned the area, looking for any sign of what had been there. That's when I saw them. Tracks in the dirt. Not footprints, not paw prints, something else. Indentations deep and irregular, as if someone had been crawling. They led from the edge of the trees to just outside my tent. And then they disappeared. I didn't pack up right away. I forced myself to stay calm, to think. If I left now, I'd be hiking out alone, vulnerable. I decided to wait until the sun was fully up, hoping daylight would bring a sense of safety. But it didn't. The tracks weren't the only thing that bothered me. My firewood was gone. The pile I had stacked neatly before bed had been scattered. Some of it was missing altogether, and my pack, though still zipped shut, felt lighter when I lifted it. I checked inside, and sure enough, food was missing. Someone had been there. Someone had been close enough to take things without waking me up. I forced down the rising panic and packed my gear, moving quickly but carefully. I kept my knife in my hand the whole time. The hike back felt different. Every sound made me jump. I checked over my shoulder constantly, my pulse hammering in my ears. The trail seemed longer than before, the trees pressing in closer. I walked fast, not stopping for anything, pushing myself until I saw the parking lot in the distance. When I finally reached my car, I locked the doors the second I got inside. My hands were shaking as I started the engine. The whole drive home, I kept glancing at the rearview mirror, half expecting to see something behind me. I never went back to that forest. I never camped alone again. And to this day, I still don't know what was out there with me. I had been planning the trip for months. A solo camping weekend, deep in the woods, away from the noise and distractions of life. Just me, the trees, and the sounds of nature. I packed light, just the essentials. My tent, sleeping bag, some food, water, a hunting knife, a flashlight, and a small first aid kit. I had a map too, though I had memorized most of the trails. The area I was heading to wasn't popular with campers, which was exactly why I chose it. I wanted isolation. The drive was long but peaceful. As I got closer to my destination, the paved roads turned to dirt, and I knew I was getting far from civilization. I reached a small clearing near a trailhead, parked my truck, and set off on foot. The weight of my backpack pressed into my shoulders, but I welcomed it. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of pine and damp earth. Birds chirped in the distance, and the occasional rustling of leaves hinted at unseen wildlife. I hiked for nearly 2 hours before I found the perfect spot to set up camp. It was a small clearing with just enough open space for my tent. Tall trees surrounded it, offering both shelter and a sense of security. A nearby creek provided fresh water, and the thick underbrush suggested that few, if any, people came through here. It was perfect. I set up my tent quickly and gathered firewood before the sun dipped too low. The temperature would drop significantly at night, and I didn't want to be scrambling for warmth in the dark. I built a fire, cooked a simple meal, and sat back against a fallen log, listening to the sounds of the forest. It was peaceful, exactly what I needed. But as night fell, that peace started to feel different. The woods became eerily silent. The usual night sounds, Crickets, distant hoots of owls, rustling leaves were absent. It was the kind of silence that made you feel watched. I told myself it was just my mind playing tricks. Being alone in the woods can do that. I tried to shake the feeling and crawled into my tent, zipping it shut. The fire outside still flickered, casting shadows against the fabric of the tent. I lay there for a while, listening. Still nothing. Then, just as I was drifting off, I heard it. A single snap, a branch breaking somewhere close. My heart pounded. Could have been anything, a deer, a raccoon. But I didn't hear footsteps, just that one sharp crack. I reached for my flashlight and flicked it on, but I didn't unzip the tent. Instead, I listened. Nothing followed. No movement, no sound. I convinced myself it was nothing and eventually fell asleep. The next morning, I stepped outside to find my firewood scattered. The neat pile I had made was now a mess, some pieces lying several feet away. I frowned, trying to piece together a logical explanation. Maybe an animal had messed with it, but the way it was spread out felt deliberate. I checked my surroundings. My food was still secured in a bag hanging from a tree, untouched. My gear was exactly where I left it. Just the firewood had been disturbed. I pushed the unease aside, ate a quick breakfast, and decided to explore. The woods were thick, the trails barely visible beneath fallen leaves. I kept track of my steps, marking trees with small scratches from my knife to make sure I could find my way back. The deeper I went, the heavier the air felt. It was an odd sensation, like I had wandered into a place I wasn't supposed to be. Then I saw it, a small clearing up ahead, different from the one I camped in. In the center was an old, rusted-out car. It looked like it had been there for years. The windows were shattered, the tires flat and sunken into the earth. Moss grew over the hood, and vines curled through the broken glass. I approached cautiously, circling it. There were no signs of who it had belonged to. No footprints, no remains. Just an abandoned car in the middle of nowhere. My stomach twisted. Who had driven this here? Why had they left it? I backed away, suddenly feeling very aware of how alone I was. The woods no longer felt inviting. They felt wrong. I turned back the way I came, following my marks. I walked faster than before, my senses on high alert. Every sound made me flinch. When I got back to my campsite, the firewood was scattered again. But this time, something else was different. My tent was unzipped. I hadn't left it that way. A cold fear settled in my chest. I stepped closer, heart hammering. My sleeping bag was unrolled. My backpack was open, but nothing was missing. Someone had been in my tent, gone through my things, and left. I spun around, scanning the trees. Whoever had done this was still out there, watching. I made a decision right then. I was leaving. I packed up as fast as I could, shoving everything into my bag without care. The walk back to my truck was the longest I had ever taken. Every rustle, every snapped twig made my skin crawl. I didn't stop. I didn't look back. When I finally reached my truck, I threw my gear inside and locked the doors. My hands shook as I started the engine. The drive back felt like a blur, but I didn't breathe easily until I was miles away from those woods. When I got home, I searched online for any stories about that area. Missing hikers, strange encounters, anything that could explain what had happened. I found almost nothing. Just an old article from decades ago about a man who had gone missing in those woods. His car had been found abandoned deep inside, but his body was never recovered. I don't know who was out there that night or what they wanted. I only know one thing for sure. I won't ever go back. I always loved camping. There was something about the isolation, the fresh air, and the quiet of nature that felt like a break from the world. So when my friend bailed last minute on a weekend camping trip, I decided to go alone. I had planned everything out weeks in advance, and I didn't want to waste the opportunity. I figured a solo trip would be peaceful. I picked a spot deep in the national forest, far from any designated campsites. I liked the idea of true solitude. No people, no distractions, just me and the wilderness. I drove for hours, then hiked for another 2, making sure to leave any recognizable trails behind. My campsite was near a small clearing with a creek running through it, perfect for fresh water and washing up. I set up my tent, gathered some firewood, and spent the first evening cooking a simple meal over the fire while listening to the sounds of the forest. Everything felt right. That first night, I slept better than I expected. The forest was alive with noise, crickets, distant owls, the occasional rustling of leaves, but none of it was out of place. The only odd thing was a faint snapping sound I heard at some point in the night. It was distant, barely enough to wake me, and I assumed it was a branch falling or an animal stepping on something. It wasn't unusual. The next day, I spent my time exploring the area, gathering firewood, and relaxing. I didn't go too far from my campsite, but I wandered enough to get a feel for the land. The air was crisp, and the scent of pine was strong. By midday, I returned to camp and made some food. The creek water was ice cold, perfect for drinking after boiling it. Everything seemed fine until I found something strange. It was a single footprint, maybe 50 yards from my tent, near the treeline. It wasn't mine. It was deeper than mine and bigger, too. It didn't look like a boot print, more like a bare foot, but the shape was slightly off. I stared at it for a while, convincing myself it was just distorted by the dirt or maybe an animal track that happened to resemble a human foot. I ignored it. I had no reason to believe anyone was out here but me. That night, I had trouble sleeping. It wasn't fear, at least not yet, but a sense of unease. The forest felt different. The usual sounds were still there, but something was off. I couldn't put my finger on it. Around midnight, I heard it again, that faint snapping sound. This time, it was closer. I held my breath and listened. Silence. Then, another snap. Closer. I sat up in my sleeping bag, my ears straining. It wasn't just one sound now, it was several. Soft, deliberate movements in the leaves, like something was circling my camp. I reached for my flashlight, but I didn't turn it on. I didn't want to give away my position. My heart was pounding. I told myself it was a deer or some other animal, but deep down, I knew better. Minutes passed. The sounds stopped. I stayed awake for a long time, waiting for more, but the forest was still. Eventually, exhaustion won, and I drifted off into a restless sleep. Morning came, and I found nothing unusual around my campsite. No footprints, no disturbed areas, nothing. It was almost enough to convince me I had imagined it. But as I was eating breakfast, I noticed something subtle. The firewood I had stacked the day before had been moved. Not much, but enough to be noticeable. A few pieces were shifted, some closer to my tent than before. I hadn't touched them. My gut told me someone had been there. I considered leaving. Something wasn't right, and I knew it. But I had one more night planned, and part of me didn't want to let fear ruin the trip. I told myself it was just paranoia, that I was overreacting. I decided to stay, but I kept my knife on me at all times. That evening, I built my fire early and sat close to it, watching the treeline. I felt exposed, vulnerable. The thought of someone watching me from the darkness made my skin crawl, but I refused to give in to fear. I forced myself to eat, to act normal, to pretend I wasn't scared. As night fell, the fire became my only comfort. Then, just as before, the sounds returned. Soft, steady footsteps, moving through the leaves. Closer this time, more deliberate, not an animal. I didn't move. I barely breathed. My knife was in my hand, my fingers tight around the handle. The fire crackled, casting shadows against the trees. I wanted to turn my flashlight on, but I was afraid of what I might see. The footsteps stopped. Silence. Then, just beyond the reach of the fire's light, I saw it. A shape. A figure. Someone standing just at the edge of the trees, watching me. I couldn't make out the details, but I knew it wasn't an illusion. Someone was there. I could feel their eyes on me. I didn't move. I didn't speak. I just sat there, gripping my knife, staring back. The figure didn't come closer. They just stood there, watching. Minutes passed, stretching into eternity. Then, slowly, they turned and disappeared into the trees. I didn't sleep that night. I kept my fire going, kept my knife ready, and waited for morning. When the first light broke through the trees, I packed up my things and left. I didn't stop. I didn't rest. I walked for hours until I reached my car and drove without looking back. I never found out who or what was out there, but I never camped alone again. I always liked being alone in the woods. There was something about the quiet, about the way the trees seemed to wrap around you, making the world feel smaller, simpler. So, when I decided to take a solo camping trip deep into the national forest, I didn't think twice. I packed light, tent, sleeping bag, a few meals, enough water, my knife, and a small hatchet. I planned to be out there for 3 nights, completely alone, no distractions, no people. I parked my truck on a dirt road at the edge of the forest, well away from the usual campsites. I wanted to go where no one else would be, where I could just exist in the quiet. I hiked for nearly 4 hours, further than I had originally planned, but I found the perfect spot, a clearing near a slow-moving creek, surrounded by towering pines. It was beautiful, untouched. The air smelled of damp earth and pine needles, the kind of clean scent that city air never had. Setting up camp was easy. I pitched my tent near the tree line, close enough to the water but not too close in case of unexpected rain. I gathered wood, built a small fire, and sat for a while just listening. The woods weren't completely silent. Birds called in the distance, and every so often, I heard the rustling of small animals in the underbrush. Felt peaceful, safe. That first night, I barely slept. Not because I was afraid, but because the forest was alive with sounds. Twigs snapping, leaves rustling, the distant hoot of an owl. I wasn't scared, but my body wasn't used to the noises. Every small sound made my brain register it as something bigger than it probably was. Still, I reminded myself that I was alone, that the only things out here were animals, and they had no reason to bother me. The second day was calm. I spent time walking through the woods, exploring. I didn't see any signs of other people. No old fire pits, no trash, no trails. Just pure, unspoiled wilderness. I gathered more wood, caught a fish in the creek for dinner, and enjoyed the solitude. The sky darkened earlier than I expected, heavy clouds rolling in. The air grew thick, and the wind picked up slightly. It smelled like rain. That night, I woke up suddenly. Something was off. The sounds of the forest had changed. The usual chirping of crickets was gone. No rustling, no night noises, just silence. I listened for a long time, heart pounding. Then, in the distance, I heard something. Not an animal noise. It was movement. Slow, careful, deliberate. I told myself it was a deer or some other animal, but it wasn't moving like one. It wasn't the quick, darting steps of something small or the heavy, careless crashing of a bear. It was slow, almost like someone walking. I stayed completely still, barely breathing. The sound moved closer. My mind raced through the possibilities. A lost hiker? Unlikely. I was miles from any marked trail. A hunter? No, it was off-season. There was no reason for anyone to be out here. Then it stopped. I strained my ears, but there was nothing. Just dead silence. I stayed awake for hours, listening, waiting. Eventually, exhaustion took over, and I must have dozed off. The next morning, I searched the area around my camp. I expected to find deer tracks, maybe signs of a small animal. Instead, I found footprints, human footprints. They circled my campsite, weaving between the trees. They weren't mine. They were fresh. My stomach twisted. I wasn't alone. I packed up quickly. My plan was to hike back to my truck and leave. As I was packing, I noticed something else. The footprints didn't come from one direction. They came from multiple sides. Whoever had been here had been watching from different angles. The thought made my skin crawl. As I started back toward my truck, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being followed. Every so often, I would stop and listen, and once I was sure I heard something, a rustle, a soft footstep. But every time I turned around, there was nothing. The trees stretched endlessly in every direction, offering no clear signs of anything or anyone. It took me almost 5 hours to get back to my truck. The moment I saw it, relief washed over me. But as I got closer, something felt wrong. The truck was just as I had left it, But when I reached for the door handle, I saw them. More footprints. They led from the woods directly to my truck. They circled it. Someone had been here, waiting, watching. I didn't hesitate. I unlocked the door, jumped in, and started the engine. I locked the doors and sat there for a moment, gripping the wheel, trying to calm my breathing. My eyes scanned the trees, looking for any sign of movement. But there was nothing, just the still, empty forest. I drove out of there as fast as I could, not stopping until I reached the highway. My heart was still pounding, my hands tight around the wheel. I don't know who was out there with me. I don't know how long they had been watching. But I do know one thing. I'll never go camping alone again. The long night in Blackwood Forest. I've never been much of a camper, but when my friend Matt convinced me to go on a solo trip to Blackwood Forest, I thought it might be a good way to clear my mind. I'd been dealing with a lot of stress, and a weekend alone in the woods sounded like the perfect way to get away from everything. Just me, my tent, and the quiet sounds of nature. I packed light, just the essentials. A tent, a sleeping bag, a flashlight, a few packs of food, a knife, and my phone for emergencies. I wasn't expecting any trouble. Blackwood Forest was a well-known camping spot, and people went there all the time. But as soon as I drove down the dirt path leading into the trees, I felt a little uneasy. Maybe it was just the isolation, or maybe it was the way the trees towered over the road, blocking out most of the sky. Either way, I ignored the feeling and kept going. I found a decent spot near a small creek. The sun was still up, but I knew it wouldn't be for long, so I set up my tent quickly. I gathered some wood for a fire and sat down, listening to the distant sounds of the forest. Birds chirping, leaves rustling in the breeze, the occasional snap of a twig. It was peaceful, but at the same time, it made me feel exposed, like I was being watched. By nightfall, the fire was crackling, and I was enjoying my meal. The forest felt different in the dark. Quieter, almost too quiet. No more birds, no more wind. Just the sound of the fire popping and the occasional hoot of an owl. I told myself it was just my imagination. I'd never spent a night alone in the woods before, so of course, my nerves were getting to me. Then I heard something. It was faint, but unmistakable. Footsteps. I froze, listening carefully. The sound was coming from the trees behind me. Slow, deliberate steps, crunching leaves underfoot. My first thought was that it was an animal, maybe a deer, but something about the way it moved felt wrong. Too heavy, too controlled. Like someone was trying to be quiet, but not quite succeeding. I grabbed my flashlight and pointed it toward the trees. Nothing. Just darkness and tangled branches. The sound had stopped, but my heart was pounding. I stayed still for a few minutes, waiting, listening. Then I shook it off. Maybe it was just my mind playing tricks on me. I'd read enough stories about people scaring themselves in the woods, and I wasn't about to become one of them. I put out the fire and climbed into my tent, zipping it up tight. My knife was within reach just in case. I lay there, listening to the silence. Every little noise seemed amplified, the rustling of leaves, the distant chirp of insects. Eventually, I must have drifted off because the next thing I knew, I was waking up in the middle of the night. Something had woken me up. I didn't move at first, just lay there, trying to figure out what it was. Then I heard it again, a sound just outside my tent. Breathing, slow, steady breathing. My chest tightened. Someone was out there, standing right next to my tent. I gripped my knife, barely breathing myself. I thought about calling out, but what if it wasn't just some random camper? What if it was someone who wasn't supposed to be here? My mind raced, trying to come up with a plan. Then, just as suddenly as it started, the breathing stopped. I strained my ears, waiting, but there was nothing, just silence. I stayed awake the rest of the night, knife in hand, barely blinking. Every little noise set me on edge, but nothing happened. No more footsteps, no more breathing. Eventually, the sun started to rise, and I let out a shaky breath. I had made it through the night. I stepped out of my tent, looking around carefully. Everything seemed normal. No footprints, no sign that anyone had been there. But I knew what I had heard. I packed up quickly, eager to leave. As I was rolling up my tent, I noticed something that made my stomach drop. A single boot print right outside where my head had been resting, facing my tent. I didn't waste another second. I grabbed my gear and hiked back to my car as fast as I could. I didn't stop, didn't look back. When I finally reached the road, I threw everything into my car and sped off, my hands shaking the whole way. I don't know who or what was out there that night, but I do know one thing for sure. I won't be camping alone ever again. I never really liked camping. The idea of sleeping outside, exposed to the elements, vulnerable to the unknown, never sat right with me. But my friend Mark had convinced me. He said a weekend out in the wilderness would be good for me. He made it sound relaxing. Fresh air, no stress, just you and nature, he had said. I gave in, packed my bag, and we set off early Friday morning. The drive to the campsite took about 5 hours. We left civilization behind quickly, exchanging highways for winding back roads, then dirt roads, and finally, a barely visible trail through dense trees. Mark had picked a spot deep in the woods, a place he had been to once before. He said it was peaceful, far from other campers. He wasn't lying about that. When we arrived, there was nothing but thick trees, a quiet lake, and silence that pressed against my ears. We set up camp near the lake, pitching our tents about 10 feet apart. Mark was in his element, effortlessly setting up his gear, building a fire, gathering wood. I helped where I could but mostly watched. The first night passed uneventfully. The fire crackled, the stars were bright, and the sounds of the forest were oddly soothing. We cooked, drank a few beers, talked about meaningless things. It was nice. I started to think maybe this wasn't so bad after all. Then the second night came. Started small. Little things I brushed off as my mind playing tricks on me. As I walked through the woods gathering more firewood, I kept feeling like someone was watching me. I told myself it was paranoia. It was the isolation getting to me, but the feeling didn't go away. It only got worse. When I got back to camp, Mark was gone. His tent was zipped, but he was nowhere in sight. I assumed he had gone to the lake to wash up or maybe explore a bit. I sat by the fire, adding more wood, waiting. 20 minutes passed, then 30, then an hour. I called his name. No answer. The silence of the woods felt heavier now, suffocating. The trees that had seemed so peaceful the night before now looked ominous, closing in on me. I grabbed a flashlight and decided to look for him. I walked toward the lake first, scanning the shore with the beam of my flashlight. Nothing. Just the still water reflecting the moon. I turned back toward the campsite, my chest tightening. Something wasn't right. Mark wouldn't just disappear like this. Then I saw something. A few feet away from the edge of the trees, near where Mark had been chopping wood earlier, lay his hat. It was dirty, like it had been stepped on. A few feet away from it, something else. A deep indentation in the dirt, as if something heavy had been dragged. I swallowed hard, my heart pounding. I followed the marks, my flashlight shaking in my hands. They led into the woods, deeper than I wanted to go. I hesitated. Maybe Mark had just wandered off and tripped. Maybe he was fine. But why hadn't he answered me? Why was his hat there, abandoned? I took a deep breath and followed the trail. The deeper I went, the worse it got. The woods were too quiet, like everything had stopped to listen. The drag marks continued, leading me through thick trees and uneven ground. Then they stopped. The ground ahead of me was disturbed, leaves and dirt scattered, as if something had struggled here. My flashlight swept over the area, and that's when I saw it. Mark's backpack torn open, half of his things spilled onto the ground. I crouched down, looking around, my breath coming in short gasps. Something bad had happened. Mark was gone. I looked for footprints, for any sign of what took him, but the ground was too messy, too chaotic to make sense of anything. Then I heard it. A branch snapped behind me. I spun around, my light cutting through the trees, but there was nothing there. My mind raced. An animal? No, this didn't feel like an animal. Animals don't drag people away. Then I heard breathing. It wasn't mine. It was slow, heavy, just behind the nearest tree. I I felt my stomach drop. I stood frozen, gripping my flashlight like it was a weapon, my pulse pounding in my ears. Then another sound, a footstep. I ran. I didn't look back. I tore through the trees, branches whipping at my arms and face. The campsite was too far, but I didn't care, I just ran. I could hear movement behind me, something crashing through the undergrowth, something big. I tripped, my foot catching on a root, and I hit the ground hard, the wind knocked out of me. My flashlight flew from my hand, rolling somewhere into the darkness. I scrambled up, heart hammering, and in that split second, I saw something move between the trees. A figure, tall, human-shaped, but wrong. I didn't wait to see more. I ran blindly, fueled by pure fear, my body screaming for me to keep going. The sounds behind me didn't stop. Whoever, whatever, was back there was following me. I reached the camp, grabbed my car keys from my tent, and didn't even think about packing. I jumped into the driver's seat, started the engine, and hit the gas. My tires spun in the dirt before catching, and I sped down the dark trail, trees flashing past me, barely breathing until I saw the first sign of the main road. I never saw Mark again. The police searched, but they found nothing. No sign of him, no tracks, no body, just an empty campsite and my word. They didn't believe me, of course. He probably got lost, they said. Maybe he fell into the lake, but I know better. I know what I heard, what I saw. Something took him, and I never should have gone camping. I should have never gone on that trip. It started as a simple plan. 3 nights alone in the woods. No cell service, no distractions, just me and nature. I had camped before plenty of times, but always with friends. This time, I wanted to challenge myself. Just me, my tent, and the silence of the wilderness. The spot I chose was deep in the national forest, far from any marked trails. I had found it months earlier while hiking with a friend. An open clearing next to a slow-moving creek, surrounded by thick trees. I knew no one else would be there. That was the appeal. Complete isolation. The first day went smoothly. I set up my tent, gathered wood, and made a fire. I cooked a simple meal, sat back in my chair, and listened to the wind move through the trees. As the sun dipped below the treetops, I felt that deep sense of peace I had been searching for. But that night, things changed. I woke up suddenly, unsure why. The fire had burned down to embers, and the forest was completely silent. No wind, no rustling, no insects, just stillness. I listened for a long time, my ears straining for any sound. Then I heard it, a single footstep. It was not the sound of an animal. It was deliberate, heavy, a boot against the dirt. I held my breath, my heart pounding in my ears. I told myself it was my imagination, just the woods playing tricks on me. But then I heard another step, closer. I stayed perfectly still, gripping my knife under my sleeping bag. My tent was zipped shut, but I felt exposed, vulnerable. The footsteps stopped, and for a long time, there was nothing but silence. Eventually, I convinced myself it was nothing. Maybe a deer, maybe my mind playing tricks. The next morning, I found something that made my stomach drop. Around my campsite, in the dirt, were footprints. Large, deep footprints. They circled my tent, moved toward the fire pit, then disappeared into the trees. I hadn't imagined it. Someone had been there, watching me. I considered packing up and leaving, but I told myself it was just a hiker who had wandered through. Maybe they saw my tent, got curious, and left. It was unsettling, but not necessarily dangerous. I wasn't going to let fear ruin my trip. That night, I kept the fire burning high. I sat awake for hours, staring into the darkness, listening. The wind had returned, and the forest was alive with sound. I started to feel foolish for being so paranoid. But then, just past midnight, I saw something move between the trees. A shape, barely visible in the firelight. It was far away, just at the edge of the clearing. I couldn't make out any details, but I knew someone was standing there, watching. I grabbed my flashlight and shined it toward the trees. Nothing, just the empty woods. But my gut told me otherwise. I shouted into the darkness, trying to sound confident. "If you're out there, I have a gun." It was a lie. I had my knife, a hatchet, and a flare gun, but no real weapon. Still, I hoped the bluff would be enough to scare them off. Silence. Then, slowly, the sounds of the forest returned. I barely slept. Every little noise made me jolt awake. But the night passed without further incident. The next morning, I found something worse than footprints. A pile of sticks had been placed outside my tent, neatly stacked, deliberate, and on top of the pile, a single rabbit skull. That was it. I was done. I packed up as fast as I could, shoving everything into my bag without bothering to organize it. I didn't care about the weight or the mess. I just wanted to get out. The hike back to my truck felt endless. Every snap of a twig made my heart race. I kept looking over my shoulder, convinced I was being followed. When I finally reached my truck, I nearly collapsed with relief. I threw my gear into the back, jumped into the driver's seat, and locked the doors. I sat there for a long moment, breathing hard. Then, just as I was about to start the engine, I noticed something in my side mirror. A figure standing at the tree line, too far to make out details, but close enough that I knew they were looking at me. I didn't hesitate. I turned the key, slammed the truck into drive, and sped down the dirt road without looking back. I don't know who was out there. I don't know what they wanted, and I don't want to know. I haven't been camping since.